Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift slowly into the uncomfortable wooden world of a medieval pirate ship, and we are going to do it gently, piece by piece, without any rush, without any drama, just the steady rocking of the sea beneath us, and the quiet crackle of a distant fire somewhere in the background of your imagination. I want you to imagine that you have just stepped out of your modern life, with its clean water and soft mattresses and toothbrushes that actually work, and you have climbed up a rope ladder on to a narrow deck made of rough oak planks, somewhere in the late 15th century, perhaps in the waters off the coast of the Iberian Peninsula, or in the busy shipping lanes near the English Channel. You might think you would manage just fine. You might think you would adjust, but tonight we will calmly explore why you would not last a single day. Not even until sunset, on one of these ships crewed by men who lived by salt, hunger, discipline, and the constant threat of death. So settle in, close your eyes if you like, and let us step carefully onto the deck. The first thing you would notice is the smell. It would hit you before the sight fully registers. The air would be thick with salt spray from the sea, mixed with tar from the ropes and seams of the ship, mixed again with sweat from unwashed bodies, and beneath all of that, the sour rot of food that has been sitting in barrels for weeks. Medieval pirate vessels were not the grand ships of later centuries. In the 14th and 15th centuries, many pirates operated from modified merchant cogs or small caravels, vessels between 50 and 100 feet in length. A typical cog, common in northern Europe, had a single mast with a large square sail and high wooden sides called freeboards. These sides trapped smells. They trapped heat. They trapped everything. You, standing there in your clean modern clothes, would immediately feel overdressed, and the deck planks would be uneven under your feet. Splinters would catch at your skin. The tar used to seal the wood would soften under the sun and stick faintly to the soles of your shoes. The sea would roll beneath you in a way your body does not yet understand. Your stomach would begin to shift, gently at first, then more insistently. Seasickness was not rare. It was expected. New sailors often spent their first days leaning over the side, emptying themselves into the gray water below. There was no sympathy for this, only laughter or indifference. The crew around you would not resemble the romantic image from paintings or films. They would be lean, sunburnt, and scarred. Many pirates in the late medieval Mediterranean were former fishermen or discharged sailors from naval conflicts between powers, like the Crown of Aragon and various Italian city-states such as Venice and Genoa. In the English Channel, piracy blurred with privateering, where captains carried letters of marque issued by monarchs like Henry IV of England, allowing them to attack enemy shipping legally during wartime. But legality meant little to the man swabbing the deck. His life was still hard. Now let us move below deck, because that is where you truly would not survive. The hold of a medieval ship was cramped and dark. The ceiling beams were low enough that you would have to stoop constantly. The air would be stale, with little circulation except when the hatch was opened. Barrels would line the sides, filled with salted meat, dried peas, hardtack, and sometimes salted fish. Hardtack, also called ship's biscuit, was a dense cracker made only from flour and water. It was baked repeatedly until nearly all moisture was gone. This allowed it to last for months, even years, without molding. But insects found it easily. Weevils would burrow into the biscuit. When sailors ate, they often tapped the biscuit against wood to knock out the bugs. Sometimes they soaked it in water or weak ale to soften it. You would be expected to do the same. You might hesitate. You might think about hygiene, but hunger would not give you that luxury for long. Medieval voyages could last weeks, sometimes months, depending on weather and targets. Fresh food was consumed quickly. Within days, there would be no fresh fruit, no vegetables, nothing green. This is where scurvy begins its quiet work. Scurvy is caused by a deficiency of vitamin C. Sailors in the medieval period did not understand vitamins. They did not know the biochemical reason behind their suffering. They only knew the symptoms. After several weeks without fresh produce, gums would begin to swell. They would bleed easily. Teeth would loosen in their sock. Old wounds would reopen. Bruises would appear without clear cause. The body, unable to produce collagen properly, would begin to fail in small, painful ways. You, accustomed to balanced meals, and perhaps the occasional orange juice in the morning, would begin to feel tired far sooner than expected. At first it would seem like simple fatigue from the motion of the ship. Then your joints would ache. Your gums would feel tender. Brushing was not common practice among common sailors. Tooth care in medieval Europe was minimal, often limited to rinsing with water or rubbing with cloth. Infection in the mouth was frequent, even without scurvy. With scurvy, it became debilitating. Imagine trying to chew hardtack with bleeding gums and loose teeth. You would struggle to swallow. You would struggle to stand. And yet, the ship would not slow for you. Pirate crews relied on strict discipline. Contrary to popular myth, many pirate ships operated under agreed articles, written codes that outlined shares of plunder and punishments for theft or cowardice. These articles became more formal in the 17th and 18th centuries, but even earlier, crews had clear expectations. A man who could not pull his weight risked being beaten, marooned, or worse. Let us return to the deck for a moment. The day begins before sunrise. The watch system divides the crew into shifts, often 4-hour rotations. In rough sea, sleep comes in short fragments. You might lie down on a coil of rope or on a thin mat near the gunwale. Rain would soak you. Spray would chill you. In winter, the cold would seep into your bones. In summer, the sun would burn your skin. There was little shade except beneath the sail. Skin cancer was not understood. Dehydration was common. Drinking water was stored in wooden casks. Over time, algae and bacteria could grow inside. The water would taste sour. Sometimes, beer or diluted wine was safer because the fermentation process reduced harmful microbes. Rats would be constant companions. Ships were ideal habitats for black rats, Ratus ratus, which traveled along trade routes throughout medieval Europe. They nested in the hold, feeding on grain and scraps. They gnawed at ropes and wood. At night, when you tried to rest, you would hear the scratching and scurrying around you. Sometimes you would feel the light touch of tiny claws on your leg or face. Rat bites were not uncommon, especially if a sailor slept heavily. Rats also carried fleas, and fleas carried diseases. The Black Death, caused by Yersinia pestis, had swept through Europe in the 14th century. While the worst outbreaks were earlier, plague remained a recurring threat in port cities. A pirate ship docking in a crowded harbor could easily encounter infected rodents. You would have no antibiotics. An infected bite could swell and redden. Fever could follow. In the cramped quarters below deck, disease spread quickly. There was no quarantine room, no sterile bandages. Wounds were treated with cloth, sometimes with alcohol, sometimes with herbal poultices if available. Many pirates bore scars from previous battles. Swords, crossbows, and early firearms like the arquebus were common weapons by the 15th century. A splinter from a shattered mast could pierce the skin as easily as a blade. Wood fragments embedded in flesh often caused infection. Without proper cleaning, gangrene could set in, and then there is the punishment known as keelhaul. Though more documented in later centuries, the concept existed earlier in maritime discipline. A sailor accused of serious crime might be tied with ropes and dragged beneath the hull of the ship from one side to the other. The underside of a wooden vessel was coated with barnacles and sharp shells. As the body was pulled along, skin would tear. Lungs would fill with seawater if the man could not hold his breath. Even if he survived the drowning, the cuts from barnacles often became infected. You, with your modern lungs unused to such shock, would likely inhale water immediately. Panic would overwhelm you. The sounds on the ship would never fully stop. The creaking of timbers as the hull flexed against waves. The snap of sails in the wind. The slap of ropes against the mast. The low murmur of men speaking in dialects from across Europe or North Africa, depending on the region. In the Mediterranean, some pirate crews included former Ottoman corsairs operating from bases like Algiers or Tunis. In northern waters, crews might include English, French, or Flemish sailors. Communication could be rough and direct. Arguments flared easily. Alcohol, when available, amplified tempers. Personal space did not exist. You would sleep inches from another body. You would eat from shared pots. Hygiene was limited to occasional rinses with seawater. Fresh water was too valuable to waste on bathing. Lice thrived in clothing seams. Fleas jumped from rat To man, the constant itching would erode your patience. Scratching could break the skin, leading to infection. And always, above all, there was the sea itself. Medieval navigation relied on simple tools. The magnetic compass had reached Europe by the 13th century. Mariners used the North Star Polaris to estimate latitude in the northern hemisphere. Dead reckoning, calculating position based on speed and direction over time, was common but imprecise. Storms could blow a ship far off course. Without accurate charts, reefs and shoals posed constant danger. A sudden squall could tear a sail, snap a mast, or capsize a small vessel. If you fell overboard, rescue was unlikely. The ship could not easily turn around. The weight of your wet clothing would drag you down. So, as this first day stretches on, you would find yourself exhausted before noon. Your stomach unsettled, your gums tender, your skin burning, the smell of tar and rot filling your lungs, the deck tilting endlessly beneath your feet. And this is only the beginning. We have not yet spoken of battle, or of long voyages without land in sight, or of the quiet despair that settles into a man who realizes there is nowhere to run. For now, just imagine standing there as the sun lowers toward the horizon, the sky turning pale orange over a restless sea, the crew moving around you with practiced efficiency, and you already wishing for a soft bed, a clean glass of water, and the simple comfort of stable ground beneath your feet. And as the light fades and the first watch of the night begins, you begin to understand, slowly and calmly, that you would not last a day on a medieval pirate ship. Now the night has settled in around the ship, and you are still here, still standing, or perhaps sitting with your back against a coil of rope, trying to understand how the men around you seem almost comfortable in this narrow wooden world, while you already feel as though your body is quietly protesting every movement of the sea. The stars above are clear if the weather is calm, and in the 15th century those stars are more than decoration, they are tools. A sailor looks up at Polaris, the North Star, to judge latitude, holding a simple instrument such as a cross-staff against the horizon, measuring angles with a steady hand. You, however, would struggle even to keep your balance while looking up, because the deck beneath you never stops shifting. The rhythm of the waves is constant, forward and back, side to side, a slow rocking that prevents deep sleep. When you are finally ordered to rest, it is not in a private cabin, because only the captain, and perhaps the sailing master, might have a small partitioned space at the stern. You lie down where there is room, on bare planks or near stacked cargo. The wood is hard. Every knot in the plank presses into your shoulder or hip. There is no pillow except perhaps a bundled jacket. The air below deck is thick and warm, and it carries the smell of men who have worked all day hauling lines, adjusting sails, and swabbing the deck with seawater. You close your eyes, but the sounds continue. Timber creaks with every swell. Water slaps against the hull. Somewhere in the darkness, a rat scratches. Another sailor coughs, a deep, wet sound that echoes in the confined space. Sleep comes in fragments, because the watch changes every 4 hours. Medieval ships typically divided crews into port and starboard watches, rotating through the night. If you are assigned to the middle watch, roughly between midnight and 4 in the morning, you are shaken awake in darkness. Your limbs feel heavy. Your mouth is dry. You climb back on deck where the wind is colder, and you take your place at a line or near the helm. Steering a cog or caravel requires constant adjustment. The rudder responds slowly, and waves push the stern off course. The helmsman grips a long tiller. Bracing against the motion, if you are inexperienced, your hands blister quickly. Salt works into the open skin. Every small cut stings sharply. By morning, exhaustion wraps around you like a damp blanket. And yet the work continues. Sails must be trimmed to the wind. Lines must be coiled carefully, because a loose rope can tangle and cause injury. A snapping line under tension can break bones. The mast, towering above you, groans in strong gusts. Climbing it is part of daily duty. A sailor ascends by gripping rope ladders called ratlins, stepping carefully from one horizontal rope to the next. If you look down, the deck seems impossibly far below. There are no safety harnesses. One missed step, one slip of sweaty fingers, and you fall. Broken limbs are common injuries at sea. A broken leg on land can be set and rested. A broken leg on a small pirate ship becomes a burden. Infection can follow if the bone pierces skin. Food in the morning is no comfort. A ration of hardtack. Perhaps a strip of salted pork if supplies allow. Salted meat is preserved in brine, packed tightly in barrels. Over time it grows tough and intensely salty. To make it edible, it may be soaked in water, but water itself is rationed. You chew slowly, each bite requiring effort. If scurvy has begun its quiet progress, your gums protest with every movement. The taste is metallic, faintly bitter. There is no fresh fruit, no citrus. The understanding that limes and lemons could prevent scurvy would not become widespread until centuries later in the British Royal Navy. In your time here, sailors attribute the bleeding gums to bad air, or to fate, or to divine will. Daily life is repetitive. Repetition can be soothing in the telling, but on the ship, it is draining. Swab to deck, adjust the sail, check the rigging, pump the bilge. The bilge is the lowest part of the hull, where water seeps in through seams and collects. Even well-built ships leak. Bilge water mixes with spilled food, with rat droppings, with anything that falls through cracks in the planking. It becomes foul, stagnant, and dark. A hand pump must be worked regularly to remove it. If not, the ship grows heavier and less stable. You might be assigned to this task. The smell rises sharply as the water is brought up and thrown overboard. It clings to your clothes. Now consider the psychological strain. Pirates in the medieval period lived with constant uncertainty. In the waters of the Mediterranean, corsairs based in ports under the authority of the Ottoman Empire attacked Christian shipping, while Christian pirates retaliated against Muslim merchants. In the North Sea and Baltic, raiders targeted Hanseatic League vessels. The Hanseatic League, a powerful commercial alliance of cities like Lübeck and Hamburg, sought to protect its trade routes, sometimes hiring armed escort. A pirate crew knew that retaliation could come swiftly. Naval patrols, merchant convoys, or even rival pirates might appear on the horizon. Every distant sail required scrutiny. Is it prey or predator? If a target is spotted, tension shifts quietly across the deck. Weapons are checked, crossbows are wound, arrows are stacked. By the 15th century, gunpowder weapons such as small cannons, called bombards, were mounted on some ships. They were heavy and slow to reload, but devastating at close range. The smoke from gunpowder is thick and choking. In battle, visibility drops. The sound of a cannon blast reverberates painfully in the ears. Wooden splinters fly when a hull is struck. These splinters can be more lethal than the cannonball itself, slicing into flesh at high speed. You, who have not grown up in this environment, would likely freeze. The instinct to duck and cover might save you for a moment, but hesitation in close combat is dangerous. Boarding actions were common. Grappling hooks would be thrown to pull ships together. Planks laid across the gap. Men rush forward with swords, axes, and daggers. Armor was minimal for common sailors, often limited to leather jerkins. A cut to the arm or thigh bleeds freely. Blood mixes with seawater on the deck, making footing slippery. And if you survive the clash, there are other realities. Captured sailors might be ransomed, enslaved, or killed, depending on the region and the captors. In the Mediterranean, Christian and Muslim states both engaged in slave-taking during this era. Ports like Algiers became centers for holding captives. You, unfamiliar with languages and alliances, would have little leverage. Between battles, boredom sets in, long stretches of gray water with nothing in sight. Conversation circles around familiar topics, complaints about rations, memories of port cities like Lisbon or Marseille. Games of dice might pass the time. Gambling disputes sometimes led to violence. Alcohol, when available, provided temporary escape, but often worsened discipline. Your body continues to deteriorate quietly. Small cuts from rope burn become salt dries your skin until it cracks. Without adequate rest, your immune system weakens. If fever comes, there is little comfort. A simple infection, easily treated in your modern world with antibiotics, can become life-threatening here. The ship cannot stop for you. The nearest land may be days away. Even the weather conspires against you. A sudden storm in the Bay of Biscay, known for rough seas, can rise quickly. Waves crash over the bow. Sailors scramble to reef the sails, reducing their surface area to prevent tearing. Rain lashes at your face. Your hands go numb with cold. Lightning splits the sky. In such moments, the fragility of the wooden hull becomes clear. Every plank, every seam is tested. If the mast snaps, the ship may be crippled. If the hull breaches, water floods in faster than the pumps can handle. You might think you could adapt, that after a few days, your body would learn the rhythm of the waves. In some ways, it might. The nausea could lessen. Your sea legs might develop. But scurvy does not reverse without fresh food. Chronic dehydration does not vanish without clean water. The mental strain of confinement does not disappear simply because you will it to. As the second day edges toward its end, you find that time has stretched strangely. Hours feel longer, yet also blurred together. The horizon remains the same thin line where gray meets gray. The deck remains rough under your palms. The same faces surround you. Sunburned and impassive, there is no privacy for thought, yet plenty of space for quiet despair. And so, as darkness begins to fall again, and the watch is called once more, you understand something deeper. It is not only the scurvy gums, or the rat bites, or the threat of keel-hauling that would defeat you. It is the accumulation of small discomforts, repeated without relief. The hard wood under your back, the sour water in your cup, the endless motion beneath your feet, all of it working together, steadily, patiently, until even the strongest resolve begins to soften, and the ship sails on, indifferent, into another long medieval night. By the third day, if we are being generous to your endurance, your body has not adjusted so much as it has surrendered. The motion of the sea is no longer shocking, but it is never absent. Even when the water is calm, the hull shifts gently with the tide, like a cradle that never stops rocking. Your muscles, especially in your calves and lower back, ache from constant micro-adjustments to maintain balance. You do not stand still on a ship like this. You sway with it. You brace with it. You compensate without thinking. Medieval sailors developed this instinct over years. You have had only hours. Morning begins again before sunrise. A faint gray light appears over the horizon, and the air carries a chill that seeps through your thin clothing. There are no thermal layers, no waterproof fabrics, no insulated boots. Wool and linen are the standard materials. Wool keeps some warmth, even when damp, but it also itches against skin that is already irritated by salt. Linen dries slowly. If it rains during the night, your clothes may remain wet for hours, clinging to you as you work. Prolonged dampness leads to rashes, fungal infections, and sores, especially in areas where skin rubs against itself. Privacy for tending to such problems does not exist. You climb below deck to retrieve a ration. The barrel of hardtack is lighter now. You crack one biscuit in half and notice more small holes than before. The weevils are active. You tap it against the edge of the barrel, and tiny bodies fall out. The others do not bother tapping anymore. They eat the biscuit with the insects inside, accepting the extra protein without comment. Hunger reduces standards quickly. You chew slowly, aware that each movement of your jaw sends a faint pulse through your swollen gums. If scurvy has progressed even slightly, you may notice a metallic taste in your mouth. You run your tongue along your teeth and feel tenderness where the gum meets enamel. Water is rationed carefully. A typical allowance might be a quart per day, sometimes less, depending on the length of the voyage and the condition of supplies. The casks are made from wood, sealed with pitch. Over time, the water inside absorbs the taste of the barrel. If the cask was not properly cleaned before filling, bacteria multiply. The water can become cloudy. Sailors sometimes strain it through cloth, but cloth itself is rarely clean. Dysentery, characterized by severe diarrhea and abdominal pain, is common in cramped maritime environments. Without rehydration salts or medical understanding of microbes, severe cases can lead to death from dehydration. As the sun rises higher, the deck heats quickly. There is no sunscreen. The reflection of light off the water intensifies exposure. Your skin reddens. Blisters form on the back of your neck and on your forearms. Some sailors wrap cloth around their heads for protection, but cloth also traps heat. Heat exhaustion creeps in slowly. Dizziness. Headache. A sense that your thoughts are slightly out of focus. If you faint, you risk falling against hardwood or overboard. There are no railings high enough to guarantee safety. Now we turn to the structure of authority on board, because that structure determines your daily experience. While later, pirate ships are known for electing captains and quartermen. In the late medieval period, many pirate crews were led by experienced mariners who commanded through a mix of reputation and force. The captain controlled navigation decisions, the distribution of plunder, and the enforcement of discipline. A boatswain managed ropes and rigging. A carpenter maintained the hull and masts. These specialists were vital. If you lack skill, you are assigned manual labor. There is little tolerance for repeated mistakes. Punishments are immediate. For theft from communal stores, a beating with a rope's end is common. For striking an officer, harsher measures may follow. Being tied to the mast for hours under the sun is one possibility. In extreme cases, marooning occurs. Marooning involves leaving a man on a deserted island or remote shore with minimal supplies, sometimes only a small amount of water and a pistol with limited powder. In the medieval Mediterranean, isolated rocky islets, the coastline. Being abandoned on one is effectively a death sentence. You might tell yourself that you would avoid trouble, that you would keep your head down and follow orders. But fatigue erodes judgment. A missed command, a slow response while hauling a line, a moment of hesitation during sail adjustment. The wind does not wait for your concentration to return. If a sail is not reefed quickly in rising wind, it can tear. Repairing a sail requires time and needlework with heavy canvas and twine. Every delay increases risk. Let us consider the medical knowledge available if you fall ill. Medieval European medicine is influenced by the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness is believed to result from imbalance among these humors. Treatments include bloodletting, herbal remedies, and dietary adjustments. On a pirate ship, resources are limited. A barber surgeon, if present, performs minor surgeries and amputations. Instruments are basic: knives, saws, needles. They are wiped clean, but not sterilized in the modern sense. Infection after amputation is common. Survival depends on luck and the strength of the individual. If you develop advanced scurvy, your legs may swell. Walking becomes painful. Old scars may reopen. A simple bruise may expand into a large dark patch under the skin. Without fresh produce, the condition worsens steadily. Some ships occasionally acquire onions or preserved cabbage at port, which contain small amounts of vitamin C, but these supplies rarely last long. You cannot simply request an orange. Oranges are luxury goods in many northern ports, imported from warmer climates and sold at high price. Pirates prioritize cargo that can be sold for profit, not fruit for crew health. Meanwhile, the rats continue their quiet occupation of the ship. At night, you feel one brush against your ankle. You jerk awake. In the darkness, you hear the soft gnawing of wood. Rats chew through sacks of grain, contaminating food with droppings. Their fleas jump easily from fur to human skin. Flea bites itch intensely. Scratching breaks the skin. In an environment where cleanliness is minimal, small wounds can fester. If plague bacteria are present, swollen lymph nodes, cagade buboes, may develop in the groin or armpit. Fever follows. Delirium may set in. A ship with multiple sick crew members becomes vulnerable to attack or storm. Now imagine a day without battle, without storm, without immediate crisis. Just routine. You scrub the deck with seawater and sand, pushing with a heavy brush. Your shoulders ache. Salt water dries on your hands, leaving white residue in the creases of your skin. The sun moves slowly overhead. There is no music except perhaps a low chant to coordinate pulling on ropes. Conversation is sparse. Many sailors conserve energy. Silence stretches. You think about land, about stable ground, about a bed that does not shift beneath you. The longing becomes a quiet ache, as persistent as the motion of the sea. Medieval pirates often spent weeks away from port. When they did reach a harbor, it might be a lawless one, a place where authorities were weak or corrupt. Taverns provided ale and temporary distraction, but with each departure, The cycle began again. Your mental resilience begins to thin. Confinement in a space barely larger than a modern apartment, shared with dozens of men, erodes patience. Arguments spark over trivial matters. A misplaced tool, a perceived insult. In such tight quarters, there is no escape from tension. Even if you withdraw physically to a corner of the deck, the ship remains small. The horizon remains empty. And always, there is the awareness of keelhauling or other brutal discipline hanging over serious transgressions. Even if rarely used, the knowledge of it shapes behavior. The hull beneath your feet, coated in barnacles and sea growth, becomes not just structure, but threat. You glance over the side of the dark water and imagine being dragged beneath it, lungs burning, skin scraping against sharp shells. The thought alone tightens your chest. As the third evening approaches, clouds gather in the distance. The air grows heavy. A storm may come overnight. The crew moves with practiced calm, securing loose items, checking knots. You copy their motions, slower, less certain. You are tired beyond what you expected possible from 3 days. Your body feels older. Your mouth tastes faintly of iron from bleeding gums. Your skin stings from sun and salt. And still, this is considered ordinary life for these men. Not exceptional hardship, not tragedy, just the sea. Who's ship? Just another voyage in pursuit of cargo and coin. You begin to understand that survival here requires more than physical strength. It requires adaptation to discomfort so constant that it becomes background noise. As night falls once more, and the first drops of rain begin to strike the deck, tapping softly against wood, you pull your damp wool cloak tighter around your shoulders. The lantern near the mast sways gently, casting uneven light across tired faces. The sea darkens to near black. The ship presses forward into wind and rain, and you, already worn thin in body and mind, realize that if this is only the third day, you are nowhere near prepared for the weeks that could follow. By the fourth day, if we continue this slow and steady descent into the realities of medieval pirate life, your sense of time has begun to blur completely. Morning and night exist, but they feel less like separate events, and more like slight changes in lighting. On the same endless wooden stage, the sea remains beneath you, lifting and lowering the hull in a rhythm that no longer surprises you, but still never allows full rest. Your body wakes before you are fully conscious, because the ship tilts, and your muscles tense automatically to keep you from rolling against another sailor. There is no personal space. There is only shared air, shared wood, shared exhaustion. The storm that threatened on the previous evening has now fully arrived. Wind presses hard against the sail. The canvas strains and snaps, sounding like distant thunder with every sharp gust. Orders are shouted, but not with excitement, only with necessity. Reef the sail, secure the lines. Brace at the mast. Rain falls in sheets, soaking wool and linen within minutes. Water runs along the deck in thin streams before spilling through scuppers back into the sea. You taste salt constantly, on your lips, on your tongue, in the back of your throat. Your hands, already blistered from rope work, now grip wet lines. Hemp rope swells. When soaked, it becomes heavier and rougher. The fibers scrape against raw skin. You feel a sting, then a dull warmth. As another blister tears open, there is no time to wrap it carefully. You wipe your hand on your already soaked tunic and continue pulling. A loose line in high wind can whip across the deck with enough force to break a rib. Every task is urgent. Every movement must be deliberate. Below deck, the hold shifts as the ship rolls. Barrels knock softly against one another despite being wedged in place. If a barrel breaks free, it can crush a foot or slam into a beam. The carpenter moves through the dim space with a lantern, checking seams for leaks. Water seeps in through small gaps between planks. Even a well-maintained 15th century vessel cannot remain completely dry. Caulking made from oakum-tarred fibers hammered into seams slows the intrusion but does not eliminate it. The bilge pump works constantly during a storm. If you are assigned to it, you stand in foul-smelling darkness, pushing the handle up and down in steady rhythm. Up and down, up and down. The water sloshes at your boots. The storm continues for hours. Sleep is impossible. When lightning flashes, The deck glows white for a brief second, revealing faces lined with strain but not panic. These men have endured storms before. You have not. Each roll of the ship makes your stomach tighten. You imagine the hull cracking. You imagine the mast snapping. You imagine being thrown into black water with waves taller than houses. Fear sits quietly in your chest, never fully leaving. When the storm finally weakens, sometime toward dawn, the air feels colder. The sky is pale and washed clean. The sea remains restless, but less violent. The damage must be assessed immediately. Torn sections of sail are lowered and spread across the deck. Heavy needles and twine appear. Sail repair is meticulous work. The canvas is thick. Each stitch requires strength. You kneel on damp wood, pushing the needle through stubborn fabric while your shoulders tremble from fatigue. The repetition is slow. In, pull, tighten. In, pull, tighten. Your gums ache more noticeably now. When you swallow, you feel soreness along your jaw. You notice that one tooth feels slightly loose. You press it gently with your tongue and immediately regret it. There is a faint copper taste again. No one comments on such things. Bleeding gums are common after weeks at sea, and though you have only been here days in this Talon, imagine the longer voyage stretching behind you. Imagine the cumulative damage. Scurvy does not announce itself loudly. It erodes quietly. There are other diseases as well. Typhus, spread by lice, can appear in crowded maritime environments. Symptoms include high fever, headache, and rash. Without treatment, mortality rates are significant. On a small pirate vessel, an outbreak can incapacitate half the crew. The close quarters that make discipline easier also make contagion inevitable. If you develop a fever, you are given space only if there is space to spare. Otherwise, you lie where you have been lying, sweating into wool and wood. Now consider injury during routine labor. A sailor climbing the rattlins slips on a wet rung. He falls partway, catching himself but tearing skin along his forearm. The cut is deep, filled with splinters. The barber surgeon cleans it with watered wine, perhaps, and binds it with cloth. There is no antiseptic in the modern sense. Over the next days, the wound may redden and swell. Pus may collect. If infection spreads to the bloodstream, sepsis can follow. In the 15th century, sepsis is not understood. It is simply a worsening condition, often fatal. You begin to understand that survival here depends heavily on fortune. Not just skill, not just strength. Fortune: the wrong slip, the wrong bite from a rat, the wrong barrel of spoiled water. Any one of these can end you quietly. Meanwhile, the social order remains firm. Shares of plunder are calculated carefully after a successful raid. A captain might receive multiple shares. Skilled specialists, like the carpenter or gunner, receive extra portions. The ordinary sailor receives one share, but until a prize is captured and sold in a friendly port, there is no wealth in hand. You endure hardship now for uncertain reward later. Many medieval pirates never became wealthy. Some were captured and executed in port cities as a warning to others. Hanging at the harbor mouth was a common punishment in later centuries, and even in earlier times, authorities made examples of captured raiders. Bodies left suspended in chains served as deterrent. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing that if captured by a powerful city-state such as Venice or by royal officials in England or France, your trial, if there is one, will be brief. Maritime law, in the medieval period, can be harsh. Piracy disrupts trade, and trade fuels kingdoms. Punishment protects revenue. By late afternoon, the repaired sail is hoisted again. The wind has shifted. The ship adjusts course slightly. Navigation remains a blend of observation and experience, without accurate longitude measurement, which will not be solved until the 18th century with marine chronometers. Position east or west is estimated. Error accumulates over days. You may believe you are closer to land than you truly are. Supplies are calculated carefully. If the voyage lasts longer than planned, rations shrink further. Hunger sharpens tempers. A disagreement breaks out over a ladle of stew made from dried peas and scraps of meat. Voices rise. A hand goes to a knife. The captain intervenes quickly. Order must be maintained. On such a small vessel, One violent outburst can fracture cohesion. You watch from the side, aware that you do not fully understand the loyalties among these men. Alliances form based on shared origin, language, or past voyage. You are new. You are unproven. As evening approaches, the sky clears completely. The storm has left the air crisp. The sunset spreads pale gold across the water. For a moment, the scene is almost peaceful. The creak of wood is softer now. The lantern is lit once more near the stern. The smell of tar is faint but constant. You lean against the rail and look out at the horizon. It is beautiful in a distant, indifferent way. The sea does not care who survives upon it. Your body, however, cares very much. Your back throbs from sleeping on planks. Your hands are raw. Your lips are cracked from salt and wind. When you smile faintly at something said nearby, you feel your gums pull painfully. You realize that even if you survive the dangers of battle and storm, the daily grind itself is slowly wearing you down. And this is only within the first stretch of days. Imagine weeks turning into months. Imagine no fresh fruit for an entire season. Imagine rat bites that never fully heal. Imagine the threat of keelhauling, not as a distant story, but as a witnessed event. Imagine watching a fellow sailor dragged beneath the hull, emerging gasping and blooded, skin torn by barnacles, the crew silent as he is hauled back on deck. The lesson is clear. Discipline is survival. As night settles again over the medieval sea, and the stars appear one by one above the mast, the ship continues its steady forward motion. The water glows faintly under starlight. The watch is called. You move into position with slower steps than before. Your body is tired in ways you did not know were possible. Your mind drifts between alertness and dull resignation. You understand now, in a calm and quiet way, that you would not last long here. Not because you lack courage, not because you lack intelligence, but because this life demands a constant surrender of comfort, of hygiene, of stability, of safety, that your modern body and mind are not built to accept. The scurvy would come. The rat bites would itch and swell. The threat of drowning beneath the keel would linger at the edge of thought. And the sea would keep moving, patient and unchanging, long after your strength begins to fade. The lantern sways gently in the wind. The deck creaks softly beneath your feet. The horizon is dark and endless, and the ship sails on into the quiet medieval night. The first thing you would notice inside an ancient Celtic hillfort is not the romance of mist over green hills, but the wind. It moves constantly across the high ground, because these forts are built on elevated ridges and hilltops throughout regions such as Iron Age Britain and Gaul. Elevation provides visibility from miles in every direction, which is useful for spotting approaching enemies, but it also exposes every inhabitant to cold air that rarely rests. You would step through a narrow entrance, flanked by earthworks and timber palisades, perhaps similar to those at sites like Maiden Castle, and immediately feel smaller than you expected. The ramparts rise above you, layered with packed chalk and soil, reinforced with wooden beams. The walls are not smooth. They are rough, irregular, built by hand-overers of labor. Inside, there is no neat grid of streets. Roundhouses cluster in uneven patterns, each built from wooden posts set into the ground, with walls of woven wattle coated in daub made from mud and straw. Roofs are thatched thickly with reeds or straw, sloping low to shed rain. Smoke drifts from small openings at the top. The smell is constant, a mixture of wood smoke, damp earth, animal dung, and unwashed bodies. You might imagine open fields of abundance around such a fort, but hillforts are defensive centers first. Farmland lies outside the walls. If you arrive in a time of tension or conflict, the gates may close, and supplies become finite very quickly. You, accustomed to walking into a kitchen and opening a refrigerator, would find no such certainty here. Food storage depends on the harvest. Grains such as barley and emmer wheat are stored in pits lined with straw. These pits protect against moisture, but are vulnerable to pests. If rodents or insects breach them, an entire season's supply can spoil. Meat comes from cattle, sheep, and pigs, but livestock require pasture. During a siege, animals may be slaughtered early to conserve fodder. That means fresh meat disappears quickly. Salt for preservation is valuable, and not always abundant. Within a short span, meals reduced to thin porridge cooked over a central hearth. You would feel hunger sooner than you expect. Iron Age Celtic diets were heavily porridge, coarse bread, and occasional stews formed the foundation. If you are not accustomed to high fiber, minimally processed grain, your digestion would struggle at first. Water is drawn from wells or nearby streams. In some Hillforts, wells are dug deep into chalk or clay. But contamination is possible, especially when many people crowd into a confined space. If livestock are brought inside the ramparts during danger, waste accumulates quickly. Flies gather, disease spreads quietly. Now consider the Woad tattoos you may have imagined as striking blue designs across skin. Woad, derived from the plant Isotis tinctoria, produces a blue dye when processed. Classical writers like Julius Caesar describe Britons staining their bodies blue, though scholars debate whether this referred to permanent tattoos or temporary body paint. If permanent markings were made by puncturing skin and rubbing pigment into the wound, infection would be a serious risk. There are no sterile needles. Tools might be bone or sharpened metal. The skin is broken repeatedly. Pigment mixed without modern hygiene enters open tissue. In a damp, smoky roundhouse, bacteria thrive. A fresh wound, especially one repeatedly irritated by wool clothing, can redden and swell. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, infection may spread along the skin. Fever can follow. In severe cases, blood poisoning develops. You, with modern expectations of sterile environments, would be alarmed by the redness alone. Here, redness is common. Minor infections are endured. Major ones can kill. The social structure inside a Celtic Hillfort is layered. There are elites, warriors, craftspeople, farmers, and possibly druids, the learned class described in sources such as Julius Caesar, Isse Commentari. The Beyogagic druids oversee rituals, adjudicate disputis, and preserve oral tradition. Warriors hold status through bravery and success in combat. Head-taking, documented in classical accounts and supported by archaeological evidence from sites in Gaul, plays a role in warfare symbolism. Severed heads of enemies are sometimes displayed at entrances or preserved in oil. To the people inside the culture, this signifies power and protection. To you, it would be deeply unsettling. Imagine entering through the gate and seeing skulls mounted near the entrance passage. The eye sockets are empty. The bone is weathered. You understand intellectually that Iron Age warfare is brutal across many cultures, including Rome and beyond, but the proximity of it inside your daily living space would weigh on you. Ritual headhunting is not random violence. It is tied to belief systems about the soul residing in the head, yet that knowledge does not soften the impact of walking past it every morning. Now return to hunger. In times of stability, trade networks connect Celtic communities across wide regions. Goods move between Britain and continental Europe. Salt, metalwork, wine imported from Mediterranean merchants all circulate. Archaeological finds at sites like Danebury show storage, pits, and evidence of organized grain management. But trade depends on peace and open routes. If conflict interrupts exchange, shortages follow. You might assume that hunting supplements diet easily. Forests surround many Hillforts. Deer, boar, and small game exist, but hunting requires time, skill, and luck. If many people hunt simultaneously during scarcity, animal populations thin quickly. Traps may catch rabbits, but protein intake drops sharply compared to normal levels. Within 24 hours of restricted food, your body begins to react. Blood sugar falls. Irritability rises. Headache develops. Inside the fort, daily life continues despite tension. Women grind grain using quern stones, rotating a heavy upper stone over a stationary lower one. The motion is repetitive and physically demanding. Flour produced this way is coarse, containing small fragments of stone that wear down teeth over years. Dental evidence from Iron Age skeletons shows significant tooth wear. You, already uncomfortable, might bite into bread and feel grit between your teeth. Children move through the narrow spaces between roundhouses. Dogs bark. Chickens scratch in dirt. Smoke from hearth fires gathers beneath thatched roofs before drifting out through small vents. Your eyes sting from constant exposure. Over time, inhaling smoke daily contributes to respiratory problems. In a confined hillfort during poor weather, multiple fires burn simultaneously. The air thickens. Water sources are critical. Some hillforts include internal wells, but others rely on external springs. If the gate is closed during threat, fetching water becomes dangerous. A contaminated well can sicken an entire population. Diarrheal illness spreads quickly when sanitation is limited. Without modern understanding of bacteria, people attribute sickness to imbalance, spirits, or fate. You, aware of microbes, but powerless to eliminate them, would feel trapped between knowledge and inability to act. And then there are the rituals. Bog sacrifices, documented archaeologically in northern Europe, with preserved bodies found in peat, suggest offerings made under specific conditions. While not all Celtic communities practiced human sacrifice, evidence from sites in Britain and Ireland indicates that ritual deposition of bodies occurred. The famous Tolan man, though from Denmark, demonstrates how peat preserves skin and hair for centuries. Imagine living in a culture where the boundary between life and ritual death is woven into belief. You may not be selected for sacrifice, but the awareness that the community engages in offerings to deities associated with fertility, war, or the land changes your sense of security. If crops fail, explanations are sought. If disease spreads, meaning is assigned. In a tightly bound society, deviation from norms is noticed. You are an outsider in this scenario. Your customs differ. Your accent stands out. Suspicion can grow quietly. Within 24 hours of restricted rations, your modern metabolism, used to regular meals, would begin to protest. Dizziness when standing. Difficulty concentrating. A hollow ache in your stomach that does not fade. Meanwhile, those raised in this environment are accustomed to seasonal scarcity. They understand that late winter, before new crops emerge, is a lean period. They ration instinctively. You, new and untrained, might consume too much too quickly if given access, drawing silent judgment from others. Night falls early in certain seasons. Inside the roundhouse, the central hearth glows softly. Light flickers against curved walls. Shadows move with each shift of flame. The doorway is low, designed to retain heat. You crouch to enter. Inside, family members sit close together for warmth. Privacy is minimal. Bedding consists of straw or animal skins spread along the perimeter. The ground beneath is packed earth. Insects live within thatch and straw. Fleas bite ankles and wrists. As you lie down, hunger sharpens your senses. The smell of smoke clings to your hair. The wind outside hums along the rampart. Somewhere beyond the walls, perhaps in dark woodland or near a sacred grove, rituals you do not fully understand continue under the authority of druids. You are aware that survival here depends on integration into a system of agriculture, belief, and defense that took generations to refine. But you arrived without preparation, without stored grain, without alliances, without immunity to local pathogens. Within a single day of true scarcity, you are already weakened. Your head aches. Your patience thins. The romantic image of painted warriors in misty hills fades, replaced by the practical reality of cold wind, uncertain harvests, potential infection from a simple skin wound colored with woad, and the quiet knowledge that food is never guaranteed. And as the fire burns lower in the center of the roundhouse, and conversation softens into murmurs, you realize calmly that survival here is not about dramatic battles. It is about endurance in the face of limited resources, strict social expectations, and a landscape that provides only when carefully managed. In just 24 hours, without reliable supply, you would begin to starve. Not dramatically, but steadily, inside the earthwork walls of an ancient Celtic hill. By the second day inside an ancient Celtic hillfort, the initial shock has faded, but the hunger has not. It has deepened. Your stomach no longer growls loudly. Instead, it feels hollow and tight, as if it has folded inward on itself. The wind continues to move across the ramparts, pressing against timber palisades and slipping through narrow entrances designed to slow attackers. The defensive earthworks that once looked impressive now feel like barriers keeping you inside with limited food and limited options. Morning begins early, because work begins early. Grain must be ground before bread can be baked. You watch as a woman kneels beside a rotary quernstone, turning the upper stone with steady, practiced force. The grain falls through the central hole and is crushed between rough surfaces. The motion is repetitive, almost meditative, but it is also exhausting. It can take hours to produce enough flour for a small group. There is no mechanical mill powered by water or wind within most early Hillfort communities. Every handful of meal requires muscle. You consider helping, but after only a few turns, your arms ache. The stone is heavier than it appears. The flour is mixed with water and shaped into flat cakes, then placed directly on a heated stone near the hearth. There is no yeast for soft bread. The result is dense, coarse, and slightly bitter. When you chew, the grit from stone fragments presses against your teeth. Over years, this constant abrasion wears enamel down significantly. Archaeological remains from Iron Age burials show flattened chewing surfaces and exposed dentin. Dental pain would have been common. There are no denies. A severe tooth infection can spread to the jaw or bloodstream. Outside the roundhouses, livestock shift restlessly. Cattle are wealth in Celtic society. They represent status, trade value, and survival. But cattle require pasture. If tension with a neighboring tribe forces the gates to close, fodder becomes limited. Hay stored for winter can run out quickly if too many animals are sheltered inside. When fodder dwindles, decisions must be made. Slaughtering animals provides short-term meat, but reduces long-term security. You, unfamiliar with seasonal agricultural cycles, might suggest eating more freely now. The community would see the danger in that thinking immediately. Water collection continues. Daily, if there is an internal well, people gather in turn with clay vessels. If not, guarded trips outside the walls are necessary. Streams can carry parasites. Boiling water requires fuel, and fuel means wood. Wood must be cut and carried up the hill. In wet weather, damp wood produces more smoke than flame. Inside a roundhouse, the smoke from multiple fires settles low before escaping through roof vents. Your eyes water constantly. Your throat feels raw. Long-term exposure to indoor smoke contributes to chronic respiratory illness. In skeletal remains from later prehistoric Britain, signs of sinus inflammation are common. As hunger persists into the second day, your energy levels drop further. Standing up too quickly brings a wave of dizziness. Your hands tremble slightly when you try to carry a clay pot. Meanwhile, those raised here move with efficiency. They have grown up with seasonal fluctuation in food supply. They understand that late winter and early spring, sometimes called the hunger gap, are the hardest months. Stored grain must stretch until new crops grow. You arrived at the wrong time. Now consider the woad again, not as decoration, but as a process. If body marking is performed, the pigment must be prepared. Leaves are harvested, crushed, and fermented. The chemical process releases indicon, which becomes indigatin, the blue dye. Fermentation smells sharp and unpleasant. If applied to broken skin, the dye can enter the bloodstream through open wounds. In a culture without antiseptic practice, the risk of cellulitis or abscess is real. A small red swelling on the arm can expand over days. Without drainage or clean bandaging, infection can become systemic. Fever, chills, weakness. In a food-scarce environment, recovery is harder. The body needs nutrients to fight infection. You do not have them. The social world inside the Hillfort grows more intense as resources tighten. Warriors train near the inner rampart, practicing with spears and shields. Shields are often made from wood with a central iron boss. Spears are tipped with iron forged by skilled smiths who work at small furnaces fueled by charcoal. Iron production requires enormous amounts of wood to create charcoal. Deforestation around settlements is a constant concern. If wood supplies shrink, both fuel and metalworking suffer. Without tools and weapons, defense weakens. Head-taking, which you might have hoped was rare or exaggerated, is treated with solemn significance. Classical accounts describe Gaulish warriors displaying severed heads as trophies. Archaeological excavations at sites such as in Tremont in southern France have uncovered stone carvings and niches that appear designed to hold skulls. Whether every community practiced this in the same way is debated, but the symbolism of the head as the seat of spirit is strong. If a raiding party returns successful, the display reinforces status and intimidates rivals. To you, weakened and hungry, such displays feel less symbolic and more immediate. The boundary between ritual and violence seems thin. If food grows scarce enough, conflict over resources increases. Raiding neighboring communities for cattle or grain is historically attested in Iron Age Europe. That means retaliation is always possible. The Hillforts' elevated position allows sentries to watch distant movement. Smoke signals or horn blasts may warn of approach. You feel the tension in every guarded glance toward the horizon. Children sense scarcity even if they do not understand it. Their portions shrink slightly. Adults claim not to be hungry so that younger members can eat more. Social cohesion becomes critical. A person who hoards or steals from communal stores risks severe punishment, perhaps exile. Exile from a Hillfort in harsh season is effectively a death sentence. Beyond the ramparts lie forests, marshes, and rival territories. Alone, without kin, survival chances plummet. Your modern expectation of individual autonomy does not align well with this tightly woven society. Here, identity is bound to clan and kinship. Decisions are collective, guided by elders, and possibly by druids, whose authority rests in knowledge of tradition and ritual. If misfortune strikes, explanations may involve displeased deities or imbalance in sacred relationships. Offerings might be made in groves or deposited in wetlands. Archaeological finds of weapons and jewelry in rivers, such as the Thames, suggest ritual deposition. Objects of value are given up in hope of favor. When grain stores thin, the idea of sacrifice gains weight. Bog bodies discovered in northern Europe, including the well-known Tolan man, show evidence of ritual killing. Though not all are definitively Celtic or connected to Hillfort communities, they illustrate a broader Iron Age practice of depositing human bodies in peat bogs. The acidic, oxygen-poor environment preserves skin and hair. Some bodies show signs of strangulation or throat cutting. Living in a culture where such acts occur under ritual context would unsettle you deeply. Even if rare, the knowledge lingers. By late afternoon of the second day, your thoughts move more slowly. Hunger affects concentration. You attempt to help repair a section of wattle wall where daub has cracked. The mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung must be pressed firmly between woven branches. Your hands are unsteady. The clay is cold and sticky. The work is repetitive and necessary to maintain insulation against wind. Every structure inside the Hillfort requires constant maintenance. Nothing is permanent. Rain erodes earthworks. Wind loosens thatch. As evening approaches, a thin stew is prepared from barley and a small amount of dried meat shaved into the pot. The portion you receive is modest. You swallow carefully, aware that tomorrow may bring even less. Your body craves fat and sugar, but those are rare luxuries. Honey exists, collected from wild hives, but it is seasonal and valuable. Dairy from cattle can provide calories. Yet if cows are not lactating or if feed is scarce, milk supply drops. You begin to feel the early signs of true caloric deficit. Your movements are slower. Your patience is fragile. A minor disagreement of a space near the hearth feels overwhelming. You withdraw toward the doorway, crouching to avoid the lowland. Outside, the wind continues its steady movement along the rampart. Beyond the walls, the land stretches dark and uncertain. Within 48 hours of restricted intake, your modern body is already under strain. Meanwhile, the people around you endure because their entire system of life is structured around managing scarcity, defending resources, and maintaining social bonds under pressure. You, separated from your normal supply chains and comforts, would struggle not only with hunger, but with adaptation to a worldview in which survival depends on collective discipline and ritual obligation. As night settles again over the Hillfort, and the hearth fire dims to glowing embers, you lie on straw that rustles beneath you. Fleas bite at your ankles. Smoke lingers in your hair. Your stomach aches steadily. The earth walls outside hold back wind and potential enemies, but they cannot create food where none exists. And you begin to understand that starving here would not be dramatic. It would be slow, communal, and shaped by forces of season, belief, and landscape that you barely comprehend. By the third day inside the Hillfort, Hunger is no longer a sharp sensation. It becomes a steady background presence, like the wind along the ramparts, or the faint smoke that never quite leaves your clothes. Your body has shifted into conservation. Movements are smaller. Speech requires more effort. When you stand, you pause for a moment to steady yourself, because your vision narrows slightly at the edges. This is not dramatic starvation. It is the quiet beginning of it. Morning tasks continue without pause. Grain stores are checked again. A pit lined with straw is opened carefully. The earth covering is removed in sections to prevent moisture from entering too quickly. Inside, barley lies in a compact layer. If dampness is seeped in, mold can form. Consuming moldy grain risks illness, including ergot poisoning in certain conditions. Ergot, a fungus that infects rye more commonly than barley, can cause convulsions and hallucinations. While not every community grows rye, the broader point remains that grain storage is precarious. You inhale the scent rising from the pit. It smells earthy but acceptable. For now, outside the walls, fields lie dormant if it is late winter or early spring. If it is summer, crops stand vulnerable to raid or drought. Agriculture in Iron Age Celtic regions relies on seasonal cycles and weather patterns beyond human control. A late frost can destroy early growth. Excessive rain can rot roots in the soil. Without diversified global trade networks, a failed harvest in one region cannot be easily replaced by imports from thousands of miles away. Local failure means local hunger. You attempt to help carry water from the internal well. The rope burns your palm as you lower and raise the bucket. When the vessel emerges, you notice small debris floating on the surface. Bits of straw, perhaps insects. The water is poured into a clay jar. Boiling would make it safer, but fuel must be rationed. The decision to boil every batch of water is not simple when wood supplies are finite. You drink carefully. It tastes faintly metallic from minerals in the soil. The woad markings on a young warrior's arm look less vibrant today. The skin around one line is It is red, slightly raised. He shrugs when someone comments. Infection is an accepted risk. A paste of herbs might be applied, perhaps containing plant extracts known through tradition to reduce swelling. Some herbs do have mild antiseptic properties, though the mechanism is not understood scientifically at the time. Whether the infection resolves depends on many variables, including his overall health and nutrition. In a food-scarce environment, his immune response is compromised. Your own skin has begun to crack at the knuckles from cold wind and constant contact with clay and water. A small split opens near your thumb. It stings when touched. You are acutely aware of how easily such a small wound could worsen. Dirt under the fingernails. Smoke particles in the air. Bacteria invisible, but present. Without access to clean bandages or antiseptic solution, you wrap the cut loosely in a strip of cloth that has already been used many times. Midday brings discussion among elders near the central open space inside the Hillfort. Voices are low, but serious. A neighboring group has been seen moving cattle along a distant ridge. Whether they are migrating or scouting is unclear. In times of scarcity, cattle raids increase. Cattle represent calories in the form of meat and dairy, and also represent wealth. Taking cattle from rivals weakens them and strengthens your own clan. Retaliation is expected. The warriors check their spears and shields again. The idea of ritual head-taking is not abstract here. It is part of the cycle of conflict and prestige. If conflict erupts, food insecurity intensifies. Warriors consume energy in battle. Injuries require rest and additional nourishment to heal. A wounded fighter cannot plow fields or guard walls effectively, and yet warfare is sometimes seen as necessary to secure resources. The logic is harsh, but consistent within the system. Your mental state shifts as hunger persists. Concentration becomes difficult. When someone speaks to you, you process their words more slowly. You feel irritation rise unexpectedly over small inconveniences, such as being asked to move aside near the hearth. This irritability is a known symptom of caloric deficit. The brain relies heavily on glucose. Without steady intake, mood fluctuates. The roundhouse where you sleep feels smaller each night. The thatched roof, supported by central wooden posts, curves overhead like an inverted bowl. Smoke stains darken the interior. The walls of wattle and daub are patched repeatedly. In heavy rain, small leaks form. Straw bedding must be replaced periodically to reduce infestation by fleas and mites. If straw supplies are low, bedding becomes thinner and less dense. Cold seeps upward from the packed earth floor. In the late afternoon, a small ritual takes place near a grove just outside the rampart. Offerings of grain and perhaps a small crafted object are placed at the base of an ancient tree. The druid overseeing the act murmurs words, invoking favor for the coming season. You watch from a distance. You do not understand every phrase, but you sense the gravity. In societies dependent on agriculture, ritual reinforces communal hope and shared responsibility. If harvest fails, explanations must exist. Sacrifice becomes part of maintaining cosmic balance. Archaeological evidence of votive deposits in wetlands and rivers across Iron Age Europe suggests that valuable items were intentionally placed beyond retrieval. Swords bent before deposition, shields cast into water, jewelry offered to unseen forces. The act of giving up wealth during scarcity underscores belief in reciprocal relationship with the divine. From your modern perspective, sacrificing valuable resources during hunger seems counterintuitive. From within this worldview, it is essential insurance. Your hunger sharpens again as evening approaches. The stew tonight is thinner than before. More water, fewer grains. The portion is smaller. Children receive priority. You accept your bowl silently, aware that complaining would isolate you socially. Social cohesion is survival. A person who disrupts harmony risks exclusion. Exclusion in a fortified community during lean times is fatal. Your body now begins to metabolize stored fat more aggressively. If this continued for weeks, muscle mass would decline. Strength would fade. For now, within 72 hours, you feel weakness primarily as heaviness. Lifting a bundle of firewood leaves you breathless. Your heart beats faster than usual during simple tasks. As night deepens, conversation turns to stories of past winters. Elders recall seasons when snow lingered longer than expected, when stores ran dangerously low, when neighboring groups attempted raids. Survival stories are not told with drama. They are recited calmly. As lessons, endurance, caution, unity. You listen, aware that you are living through a mild version of what could become far worse. The wind outside has shifted slightly. It carries a colder edge. You pull a rough wool cloak tighter around your shoulders. The fabric scratches against your neck. You feel the small cut on your thumb pulse faintly. You wonder whether the redness has spread. There is no mirror. You rely on sensation alone. Inside the Hillfort, life continues according to rhythms refined over generations. Crops will eventually sprout. Livestock will graze again in open fields. Trade caravans may return with salt or metal goods. But in this moment, in these early days of scarcity, you already understand that your modern assumptions about constant availability do not apply. Starvation here would not arrive as sudden collapse in a single dramatic scene. It would unfold slowly through smaller portions, heavier tasks, mounting tension, and vulnerability to infection from something as simple as woad punctures or cracked skin. Ritual and warfare would continue around you, woven into daily existence. As you lie down again on straw that barely cushions the hard ground, your stomach tight and your thoughts slow, you recognize that surviving in an ancient Celtic Hillfort demands more than courage. It demands deep integration into agricultural cycles, belief systems, and communal discipline that you do not possess. And with each passing day of limited food and relentless wind along the ramparts, your strength fades just a little more. In the damp quiet of an ancient Celtic Hillfort, you would begin your final day, not with battle cries or ritual chants, but with hunger pressing against your ribs from the inside. Because the truth about life inside places like Maiden Castle or Danebury was that food security depended on the season, on the weather, and on how well the last harvest had been guarded from mold, mice, and rot. And if you arrived in late winter, when the grain pits had already been opened and scraped thin, you would find that most of what remained was coarse barley meal, mixed with husks, ground between stone corns that left grit in the flour, and boiled into a porridge so bland and heavy that your stomach would swell before it felt satisfied. And if you were not used to that texture, to the constant chewing of fibrous mash with no salt and no sweetness. Your body would reject it, not because it was poisonous, but because it was insufficient for someone who had not been raised on it since childhood. You would walk the interior of the Hillfort and notice how the roundhouses were clustered close together within earthen ramparts that rose in thick rings around the settlement, defensive banks reinforced with timber and chalk, and you might assume that such fortification meant stability. Yet inside those walls, everything depended on stored crops and small livestock. Because fields lay outside the ramparts and could not be accessed during raids, and if enemies cut supply lines or burned surrounding farmland, the people within would ration grain immediately, reducing portions to thin gruel served once per day. And if you were an outsider without kinship ties, your share would be smaller still, because survival in Iron Age communities depended on lineage and loyalty, not generosity. You might try to supplement your hunger with foraged food, but inside the Hillfort there would be little growing except trampled grass and kitchen herbs. And outside the gates, the landscape would stretch into damp lowlands and patches of woodland where acorns needed leaching to remove bitterness, and where hazelnuts, when available, were guarded resources, and without knowledge of which plants were safe and which caused cramping or hallucination. You could easily chew the wrong leaves and spend the night bent over in pain beside a smoky hearth that did nothing to ease your dehydration. The hearth itself would not comfort you the way a modern fireplace does, because smoke from oak and ash would curl through a central roof opening, but much of it would linger beneath the thatch, coating your lungs and your clothing with soot, and as you sat there weak from hunger, your eyes would sting and your throat would tighten, and you would begin to cough in a space where coughing marked weakness, because illness inside a Hillfort was dangerous, not only for you, but for the entire household, and suspicion could fall quickly on anyone who seemed unable to work. If you sought meat, you would discover that cattle and sheep were wealth, not daily meals, and slaughter happened for ritual, for winter necessity, or for feasts tied to seasonal gatherings, and even then, the choicest cuts were distributed according to status. So your bowl might contain broth, flavored with bone and a scrap of gristle, and if you were unaccustomed to drinking thin animal fat floating on cloudy liquid, your body might struggle to extract enough calories to steady your shaking hands. Water would not flow from wells lined in stone the way you expect, because many Hillforts relied on surface springs or stored rainwater, and contamination from animals, from runoff, and from human waste could seep into these sources. And if you drank deeply out of desperation, you might ingest parasites that caused cramps and diarrhea within hours, further draining the strength you already lacked. And by the end of that first day, starvation would not only be about absence of food, but about your body's inability to retain what little nourishment you found. As evening approached, you might notice the blue stains on the skin of some inhabitants, traces of woad used for decoration and identity. And if you imagined adopting the same markings to blend in, you would learn that woad derived from ice required fermentation and careful preparation, and when applied to broken skin or too poorly cleaned cuts, it could trap bacteria beneath pigment, leading to swelling and infection. And without antiseptics, a small, irritated tattoo could become a spreading redness that pulsed with heat in the chill of night. You would hear talk of raids and of ritual headhunts, because archaeological evidence from sites across Iron Age Britain and Gaul suggests that severed heads were displayed as trophies, sometimes preserved in cedar oil or mounted near entrances. And if you felt faint from hunger while standing near such displays, you might also feel the psychological strain of living in a culture where violence was both practical and symbolic, and fear consumes calories, draining you faster than physical labor alone. Labor itself would not pause for your weakness, because grains still needed grinding, animals needed tending, and ramparts required maintenance. And if you failed to lift a basket of soil or to carry water from a spring below the fort's slope, others would notice. And in a community structured around mutual survival, those who could not contribute risked being set aside, not with cruelty necessarily, but with practicality that left little room for compassion. At night, when the wind pressed against the outer banks of earth and timber, you would lie on a pallet of straw that smelled faintly of mold, and your stomach would ache in slow waves, and sleep would come in fragments interrupted by the sounds of livestock shifting and of distant dogs barking beyond the rampart, and hunger would sharpen every sound until even the crackle of embers felt loud in your ears. If you attempted to leave at dawn in search of better food beyond the hill, you would face the reality that surrounding territories belong to other groups with their own fortifications and boundaries, and crossing into their lands without protection could be interpreted as spying or theft. And in times of scarcity, strangers were rarely welcomed. So your search for sustenance could end abruptly at spear point before you ever reached a field of ripening grain. The bogs that dotted the landscape might seem like places of refuge, because water implies life. Yet these wetlands were treacherous, layered with peat that concealed deep pools beneath deceptively firm surfaces. And they were also places of ritual deposition, where offerings, including human bodies, were placed with care or with violence. And if you wandered there alone, weakened by hunger, you could misstep and sink slowly into cold water that numbed your limbs before panic fully formed in your mind. Even if you avoided physical danger, the climate would work against you, because Iron Age Britain and parts of continental Europe experienced fluctuations in temperature and rainfall that affected crop yields, and a series of wet summers could reduce stored surplus dramatically, meaning that by the time you arrived, the community might already be rationing at levels that barely sustain children, let alone an adult unused to scarcity. You might attempt to barter skills in exchange for food, but without shared language, nuances, and kin connections, your offers would carry little weight, and tools such as iron sickles or bronze ornaments were valued commodities produced through specialized knowledge. So unless you possessed those crafts, your labor would be measured against immediate necessity, and hunger would continue to hollow your cheeks. Inside the Hillfort, social hierarchy determined who ate first and who waited, and feasting rituals reinforced bonds among elites, while common households observed from a distance. And if you stood at the edge of such a gathering, smelling roasted meat while holding an empty bowl, the psychological strain alone could weaken your resolve, because anticipation without fulfillment intensifies the perception of deprivation. The physical layout of concentric ramparts, impressive as they appear in archaeological surveys, did not create food, and they required constant upkeep, especially after heavy rain eroded slopes, and contributing to that maintenance, while underfed, would exhaust you quickly. And dizziness on steep earthen banks could lead to falls that bruised ribs already sore from malnutrition. If you tried fishing in nearby streams, you would need woven traps or spears, and skill in their use, and competition from others who depended on the same limited protein source, and without experience. You might stand for hours in cold water, burning more calories than you gained, and return with nothing but numb feet and deeper fatigue. By the second night, though only 48 hours might have passed since you entered the Hillfort, your body would already begin conserving energy, slowing movements, sharpening irritability, and clouding thought. And in a society where alertness signaled readiness for defense, your sluggish responses could mark you as liability rather than ally. Infections from minor cuts, sustained while grinding grain or handling livestock, could swell without treatment. And if woad, pigment, or dirt entered those wounds, inflammation would spread, and fever would increase your caloric needs at the very moment when intake remained insufficient, accelerating decline in a way that feels gradual yet relentless. The communal structure that protected insiders would not extend fully to you, because Iron Age kinship networks formed the backbone of survival. And without ancestral ties woven into the lineage of that Hillfort, you would remain peripheral, tolerated perhaps for a short time, but not prioritized when stores ran low. So, within 24 hours, starvation in an ancient Celtic Hillfort would not look dramatic. It would not resemble collapse on a battlefield. Instead, it would unfold quietly, in shrinking portions of barley mash, in guarded glances from those who measured your usefulness, in the ache beneath your ribs as smoke drifted upward into a darkened roof space, and you would understand that survival there required not only resilience but belonging, and without both, your strength would fade steadily, leaving you seated beside a low fire, listening to wind against earthworks, aware that the walls around you kept enemies out, yet could not keep hunger away. You step into the throne room not as a hero, not as a general returning from victory, but as a quiet observer, and even in that small role you would already be in danger. The Byzantine throne room, especially within the great palace of Constantinople, is not merely a hall with a chair at one end. It is a stage built for ritual, hierarchy, and fear. The walls are covered in mosaics made from glass and gold tesserae that reflect candlelight in soft, shifting patterns. The floor is polished marble, cool beneath your sandals. The air smells faintly of incense, burned in censers that hang by chains near the columns. Everything feels deliberate. Every sound echoes. Every footstep carries, and in this carefully controlled environment, survival depends not on strength, but on precision. The emperor sits elevated, often beneath a canopy, sometimes flanked by mechanical devices designed to impress for an envoy. In the 10th century, under emperors like Constantine VII, descriptions in the work De Ceremoniis detail elaborate court rituals. Bronze lions near the throne could roar through hidden bellows. Mechanical birds in gilded trees could chirp. The throne itself might rise slowly through a concealed mechanism during an audience. These devices are not entertainment. They are reminders that power here is theatrical and absolute. If you react incorrectly, if you show too much surprise or too little reverence, you are noticed. You would not understand the choreography at first. When to bow, how low to bow, whether to prostrate fully, touching your forehead to the floor, in the act known as proskynesis. In Byzantine court etiquette, mistakes are not small social errors. They can be interpreted as disrespect. Disrespect in a court where emperors have ordered brothers blinded to secure succession is not forgiven easily. Blinding is not rumor in this empire. It is policy. In Byzantine political culture, physical wholeness is closely associated with legitimacy to rule. An emperor must be physically intact. Therefore, when a rival claimant is captured, he is often blinded rather than killed. Blinding renders him ineligible for the throne while avoiding the stigma of direct execution. In the reign of Justinian II, who first ruled from 685 to 695, he himself was mutilated. When overthrown, his nose was cut off, earning him the nickname He later returned to power with a golden prosthetic nose. But others were not so fortunate. Rivals were seized, restrained, and had their eyes destroyed with heated irons or sharp instruments. The act was brutal, often performed publicly to eliminate doubt. Imagine standing in this throne room knowing that a single accusation, a whispered suggestion of disloyalty, could place you in a dark chamber where your sight is taken. The procedure is rarely gentle. Heated metal rods might be pressed into the eye. In other cases, the eyeballs are removed entirely. Infection frequently follows. Survival rates vary, but blindness is almost guaranteed. You would live, perhaps, but in permanent darkness, dependent on others, in a society where dependence is dangerous, and whispers are constant. In this palace, the Byzantine court thrives on intrigue. Eunuchs occupy positions of immense influence. Castrated, often in childhood, they cannot produce heirs and are therefore considered less threatening to dynastic continuity. Because of this, emperors trust them with intimate access. They serve as chamberlains, generals, administrators, and personal attendants. Figures like the powerful eunuch Basil Lekapanos in the 10th century wield enormous authority behind the scenes. You might assume eunuchs are marginal figures. They are not. They move quietly through corridors, present in private meetings, carrying messages, observing everything. Their loyalty is often to the emperor personally, but alliances shift. A word spoken carelessly near a curtain, a complaint uttered in frustration, might travel through a chain of attendants and reach ears you never see. In a court where plots are common, information is currency. Poison is another silent presence. Byzantine sources recount multiple instances of poisoning or suspected poisoning in imperial politics. While not every sudden death is confirmed as murder, suspicion alone can destabilize a reign. Chalices of wine are both symbol and threat. Banquets in the palace are formal, layered with ritual. Dishes are presented in sequence. Tasters may sample food before it reaches the emperor, but safeguards are not perfect. A sympathetic servant, a bribed official, a rival faction seeking advantage. Any one of these can introduce a toxin. Common poisons in the medieval world include arsenic, derived from mineral sources, and various plant-based toxins. Arsenic in particular is difficult to detect by taste when mixed into strong wine or heavily spiced dishes. Symptoms may begin with abdominal pain, vomiting, and weakness. In higher doses, it leads to organ failure. Medical knowledge at the time cannot easily distinguish poisoning from sudden illness. A death can be labeled as fever or divine judgment. You, accustomed to modern forensic science and secure food chains, would find yourself constantly uncertain. Do you drink immediately when handed a cup? Do you wait? If you hesitate, does that signal distrust? If you drink confidently, are you reckless? The act of swallowing becomes political. The throne room itself is only the visible center. Behind it lies a maze of corridors within the great palace complex, stretching toward the hippodrome and the Sea of Marmara. Servants move through these corridors, carrying documents sealed with wax. Generals arrive to report on campaigns against Bulgars or Arabs. Clerics from the Hygia. Sophia entered for consultations on theological disputes. In Byzantium, theology and politics intertwine tightly. The iconoclast controversy of the 8th and 9th centuries, debates over the veneration of icons, led to exiles, persecutions, and shifts in imperial favor. Aligning yourself with the wrong theological faction could end your career. You would need to master not only court etiquette, but doctrinal nuance. A misplaced phrase about the nature of Christ, about the legitimacy of icons, about the authority of the Patriarch of Constantinople, could mark you as suspect. Trials for heresy are not abstract debates. They carry consequences, including exile to remote monasteries or confiscation of property. The visual splendor of the throne room hides this tension. Gold mosaics depict Christ Pantocrator gazing down from domes. Saints lined in solemn rows along the apse. The emperor is presented as God's representative on earth. This sacral dimension intensifies danger. Opposition to the emperor is not merely political dissent. It borders on sacrilege. Imagine standing among courtiers dressed in silk robes imported from imperial workshops. The rustle of fabric is soft but constant. Jewelry glints in candlelight. Every gesture is measured. You feel sweat along your spine despite the cool marble floor, because the stakes are invisible but immense. Someone kneels before the emperor to present a petition. Another waits to be summoned. You notice how quickly faces change when the emperor's expression shifts. A faint frown can silence a room. Blinding is not the only mutilation practiced. Rivals might have tongues cut out to prevent speech. Noses might be sliced, as with Justinian II, to mark permanent disgrace. These acts are symbolic. They transform a political opponent into a living warning. You would see such men occasionally, perhaps in monastic exile, their scars visible reminders of failed ambition. And yet, ambition thrives. Families maneuver to marry daughters into imperial circles. Generals cultivate loyalty among troops stationed in Anatolia or along the Danube. A successful military commander can become a threat if his popularity grows too strong. Emperors are wary of generals returning to Constantinople at the head of victorious armies. Coups are not rare in Byzantine history. From 695 to 717 alone, multiple emperors are deposed in rapid succession. Stability is fragile. If you are merely a minor official, you might believe you are safe. But lower ranks are often used as scapegoats. A failed campaign needs explanation. A financial shortfall requires blame. Tax collectors in distant provinces are accused of corruption. Courtiers are accused of conspiracy. Torture can be used to extract confessions. Methods vary, including beating, suspension, and confinement. The line between interrogation and punishment is thin. You would struggle not because you lack intelligence, but because survival requires constant vigilance without visible enemy. In a battlefield, danger is direct. In the Byzantine throne room, danger smiles politely. It bows. It offers wine. As the audience concludes for the day, courtiers withdraw in ordered sequence. The emperor departs through a guarded doorway. The mechanical lions fall silent. The incense burns lower. You remain standing for a moment, aware that every interaction you had today may be discussed later in private chambers. Who you greeted first, how long you held your bow, whether your gaze lingered too long on the imperial regalia. In Tzpala's walls have ears, not because of magic, but because of human networks. Eunuch officials oversee communications. Trusted attendants report irregularities. Letters are intercepted. Alliances shift quietly overnight. You would not survive here long, not because you would immediately be blinded or poisoned, but because the mental strain of constant calculation would exhaust you. Every word measured, every sip evaluated, every glance interpreted. The splendor of gold and silk would not comfort you. It would remind you that power is concentrated, fragile, and defended through methods both subtle and brutal. And as you leave the throne room at the end of the day, walking across marble that has felt the footsteps of emperors, generals, saints, and traitors, you would understand that survival in Byzantium requires more than loyalty. It requires silence, perception, and a tolerance for fear that few modern minds are trained to endure. The day after you first entered the throne room, the routines of the Byzantine court begin to settle in, and you realize that danger is not only in grand gestures, but in quiet observation. You move among clerks, soldiers, and eunuch attendants, each carrying out tasks that appear mundane. But any misstep can be costly. A slip of the tongue while reading a petition, a hesitant bow before a visiting diplomat, or a glance at the wrong noble's robe can be remembered and reported. Court intrigue in Byzantium is subtle, layered, and patient. Rumors are currency. Alliances shift overnight. You are constantly calculating, even when simply walking from one chamber to another, because you do not yet understand the social map of power. The eunuchs are everywhere. Some stand behind curtains, some observe from corners, some pass messages unseen. Their presence is quiet, but absolute. You might think they are harmless, but their knowledge allows them to control access. They are the filters of information, the keepers of secrets, and the distributors of favors. One careless comment in their hearing could reach the emperor in hours. One misplaced trust can mark you for punishment. Their influence is invisible, but potent. You learn quickly to watch your tone, to watch your posture, to watch what you do not say as much as what you do say. Meals are not safe either. Wine and water are carefully rationed, but no amount of caution guarantees immunity. Poison is a known tool in the Byzantine court. The famous historian Michael Salos records instances of intrigue where food and drink are suspected of carrying death. Chalices of wine are more than they are tests, and the emperor's table is surrounded by layers of scrutiny. A taster may sample first, but errors are possible. Subtle poisons derived from arsenic or plant toxins can kill silently, and by the time symptoms appear, it is too late to react. Your survival depends on observation, patience, and an unflagging awareness that even the simplest act of lifting a cup carries risk. The palace itself is a labyrinth. Hallways twist, staircases ascend and descend unexpectedly. The great palace of Constantinople has courtyards, chambers, chapels, and private apartments, all interlinked. You move from one hall to another, guided by attendants, but you soon learn that not every path is safe. Doors may be locked or guarded. A wrong turn could place you in the company of a suspicious noble or a rival faction. Even accidental proximity can be dangerous if your presence is interpreted as surveillance or curiosity. The very act of being in the wrong room at the wrong time could be interpreted as plotting. Blinding, as previously mentioned, is not rare. It is one of the more extreme forms of discipline, reserved for those who threaten succession or political stability. Imagine being summoned for a minor infraction, only to find yourself in a dim chamber where instruments are prepared. Heated rods, knives, or other tools lie ready. The act is quick, designed to mark a man permanently and prevent further ambition. Survivors are left disoriented, vulnerable, and humiliated. To witness this is to understand that fear is a constant companion in Byzantine halls. Torture and coercion are used in subtler forms as well. Questioning can be prolonged, uncomfortably, and psychologically taxing. Confinement in small, dark rooms is common. Sleep deprivation, forced standing, or sensory manipulation may accompany interrogation. Eunuchs, trusted with oversight of private chambers, monitor behavior carefully. Their silence is more threatening than any noise. You learn to restrain natural reactions, flinching, sighing, facial expressions. All of these are interpreted as clues to intent or guilt. The role of women in the court adds another layer of complexity. Empresses, consorts, and imperial daughters wield influence through marriages, patronage, and personal alliances. A casual comment about a family member or spouse could have repercussions. Gossip travels fast, filtered through attendants and eunuchs. A misstep in conversation could place you at odds with powerful households. You learn quickly that loyalty must be carefully calibrated. It is never absolute, never assumed. Religion intertwines with politics in inescapable ways. Byzantine emperors positioned themselves as God's representatives on earth, and theological disputes can have mortal consequences. Aligning with the wrong faction, whether supporting iconoclasm or opposing it during its controversies, can lead to exile, punishment, or forced monastic life. Clerics observe behavior and report when convenient. The line between spiritual guidance and surveillance is thin. Every prayer, every gesture, every word matters. As the day unfolds, you are also exposed to small but constant dangers of everyday life. Chandeliers hang from high ceilings, filled with candles. Wax drips on the marble floors, causing slips. Carpets and rugs are slippery when polished floors are wet. Heavy doors can swing suddenly, striking an unsuspecting visitor. Servants carrying hot vessels of food or wine navigate the same tight corridors you do. Injuries, while not deliberate, are common. Survival in the palace is as much about attentiveness to environment as it is about political cunning, and yet you cannot simply avoid interaction. Orders must be followed. Reports delivered. Observations recorded. Every action is under scrutiny. Even silence can be interpreted as defiance. Every day in the palace teaches endurance, patience, and the quiet art of noticing without being noticed. Miscalculation leads not only to personal danger, but can destabilize larger political structures, bringing the emperor's wrath onto yourself inadvertently. By nightfall, you begin to understand that fear here is cumulative. It is not a momentary shock, but a persistent, low-level tension. Every gesture is weighted. Every step is cautious. The candles burn low in the throne room. Shadows stretch across mosaics, and the air cools. You realize that in this environment, mental resilience is as critical as physical safety. The palace is a living organism of observation, calculation, and consequence. To survive even a week, you must anticipate invisible threats, endure a constant surveillance, and resist the gradual erosion of confidence that comes from never knowing who watches or why. Even as you rest, if you rest at all, you do so with awareness that tomorrow will be the same. You will move through the corridors again, attend audiences, bow and rise, speak and remain silent, sip and assess. The threat of blinding, of poison, of eunuch spies, lingers quietly at the edges of every moment, and you begin to understand that survival here does not rely on bravery, or strength, or even intelligence alone. It relies on endless vigilance, patience, and the acceptance that at any point, something invisible, subtle, or immediate may end your time in the palace entirely. The next morning, you wake, knowing that yesterday's lessons are not enough. You have learned that the Byzantine throne room is a place of constant vigilance. But today, the deeper layers of intrigue begin to reveal themselves. Courtiers move with purpose, yet every movement has hidden meaning. Some approach the emperor with documents. Others linger in corners, whispering. Every action is deliberate. Every glance carries weight. You might think that observing quietly is enough. But in Byzantium, visibility is never neutral. Simply being present in the wrong place at the wrong time can mark you as a threat or a potential conspirator. You begin to notice the patterns of the eunuchs more clearly. They are always positioned to see without being seen, to listen without attracting attention. One might be stationed near a doorway, ostensibly arranging robes or candles, but in truth, monitoring who enters and leaves, noting who lingers too long or smiles too faintly. Another might be behind a curtain, quietly conveying the emperor's preferences or messages to other officials. Their influence extends beyond their immediate presence. A whispered word from a distant hallway can have immediate consequences. You cannot afford to underestimate them. Meals remain a trial. The emperor's table is laden with rich foods, but richness carries risk. Spiced meats, wine, and sauces are tempting. But even the most careful guest cannot fully verify the contents. Poison is subtle and sometimes undetectable until symptoms appear. You might watch a taste or sip first, but trust is fragile. A friend or servant who seems loyal one moment may be bribed, coerced, or acting out of fear the next. Even a slight hesitation in consuming a dish can be noted and interpreted. Drinking wine becomes an act of calculation, as fraught as any political move. Meanwhile, the emperor's court continues to operate as a complex machine. Military reports arrive from distant provinces. Generals report victories, failures, and troop movements. The slightest exaggeration or omission can have serious consequences. An overconfident general may draw suspicion. A cautious report may be seen as cowardice. Those who fail to navigate the subtleties of communication quickly find themselves sidelined or worse. The palace is full of men and women who know this and act accordingly. You, unfamiliar with the codes, are at constant risk of misstep. You may also encounter sudden demonstrations of power. Imperial punishments are public lessons. A minor official accused of treachery might be confined in chains, publicly humiliated, or worse, maimed. Blinding remains one of the most feared methods. But other forms exist. Mutilation of ears, noses, or lips marks a person permanently, serving as both punishment and warning. You would not need to witness it directly to feel its effect. The threat alone permeates the air, influencing behavior subtly yet profoundly. Religious and ceremonial obligations add another layer of stress. Emperors act as God's representatives, and court rituals are elaborate and prescriptive. Processions, prayers, and audience protocols require precision. One misaligned step, one incorrectly intoned phrase, one gesture too slow or too fast can be interpreted as disrespect or even heresy. The complexity of these rituals is staggering, and no amount of casual observation will prepare you fully. You must memorize the proper sequences and understand the symbolic weight of each action, all while remaining alert to potential threats from those around you. Alliances shift quietly. Noble families compete for influence through marriage, patronage, and access to the emperor. Courtiers track loyalties, feigning support while secretly undermining rivals. You might witness subtle exchanges. A touch on the arm, a whispered phrase, a brief glance. To the untrained eye, they appear inconsequential, but in Byzantium, they are pieces of a larger puzzle. Missing one detail could result in your placement on the wrong side of a power struggle, with consequences ranging from exile to physical punishment. You also begin to understand the limitations of the court's defenses. Spies are embedded not only among eunuchs, but within the ranks of lower officials and servants. Even messages carried outside the palace may be intercepted. Nothing is private. What is said in confidence can quickly be reported to the emperor or his trusted advisors. This constant surveillance wears on you, subtly, eroding natural reactions and forcing you to maintain a facade at all times. As the day progresses, the psychological strain accumulates. Every gesture is measured, every word weighed. The luxury of ignoring danger, as one might in a modern office or public space, does not exist here. Anxiety becomes almost physical. A tightening in your chest, a queasy awareness in your stomach. Even brief lapses in attention could be noticed and exploited. You realize that survival requires the blending of observation, restraint, and perfect timing, along with an ability to interpret social signals that are at once subtle and deadly. The palace corridors themselves are dangerous. Marble floors can be slick with wax or water from nearby fountains. Chandeliers drip hot wax. Heavy doors swing unpredictably. Servants carry hot dishes or burning lamps. An accident can be fatal or at least severely damaging, and it will be remembered. An injury that prevents proper attendance in an audience could be interpreted as incompetence or even feigned disrespect. Every physical action is monitored, consciously or unconsciously, by those around you. Even at rest, danger persists. Courtiers, eunuchs, and palace guards move silently through the halls. Doors creak, candles flicker, and shadows shift. You cannot fully relax. Sleep, if possible, is light and vigilant, punctuated by the occasional noise that draws your attention immediately. Rest is not restorative in the palace. It is merely temporary suspension of awareness, always interrupted by the persistent hum of observation and the knowledge that power here can strike unpredictably. As night falls, the throne room empties, but the lessons of the day linger. The mosaics glint faintly in the dim light. The gold reflects candlelight in soft patterns that seem to shift as you walk. You notice the subtle cues you might have missed earlier. The angle of a noble's bow, the hesitation of a servant's hand, the tone of a eunuch's whisper. Each is meaningful. Each may influence your fate. By the end of this second day, you understand that survival in Byzantium requires more than mere presence or obedience. It demands constant awareness, careful judgment, and the endurance to act with precision in a setting where the cost of error is immediate and often permanent. Fear is an undercurrent in every interaction, yet it must be managed, for overt panic or hesitation is as dangerous as any overt threat. And so, as the palace quiets and the night air cools, you remain alert, mentally cataloging each observation, each subtle shift in behavior, each whispered message that may matter later. The throne room, the eunuchs, the courtiers, the subtle threats of poison and blinding, all of it forms an environment in which a misstep can be fatal. You realize that your modern assumptions, your confidence in personal safety, are useless here. In Byzantium, survival is not guaranteed to the cautious, the clever, or the brave. It is granted only to those who can navigate the invisible currents of power without misjudging a single detail. By the third day, you begin to feel the subtle weight of constant observation pressing against your mind. Each morning, the palace corridors are filled with attendants, soldiers, clerks, and eunuchs moving with deliberate, measured steps. Every gesture carries meaning. Every pause is noted. You notice that even the smallest inflection in a voice can change the interpretation of a phrase. The emperor rarely speaks directly to most attendants, yet his presence permeates every room, every hall, every staircase. The psychological pressure is continuous. You would think to relax in the presence of others, but the court never allows it. You must maintain awareness of posture, speech, and gaze at all times. Today, you are summoned to deliver a minor report. It seems routine, but the ritual surrounding it is exacting. You kneel before the emperor's throne, holding the document with both hands. The eunuchs watch. Your bow must reach the correct angle. Your eyes must meet the floor at precise moments. A subtle misstep, a hesitation, a glance toward a member of the court can be interpreted as insolence or concealed knowledge. Even though your report contains factual information, it is your comportment that is judged. A whispered aside in the margins, a smirk, or a tremor in your voice might suggest duplicity. Observation is the court's primary instrument of power. The palace is filled with the sound of quiet movement. Sandals on marble, soft rustle of silk, the faint hiss of incense smoke rising from censers. It is easy to underestimate these noises, yet they reveal everything. Who lingers near the emperor? Who moves too quickly through corridors? Who pauses too long at a door? The eunuchs are attuned to these cues, and you are not. Every step, every hand movement, every gesture could be interpreted as compliance, ambition, or rebellion. A single miscalculation can result in loss of favor, exile, or worse. Meals continue to be a source of danger. The banquet table glimmers with gold and silver platters, rich foods, spiced meats, and deep red wine. You are mindful of the chalice placed before you. The emperor's taster has already sampled the wine, but trust is fragile. A poison, subtle and slow-acting, could be hidden among spices or mixed into salt. Symptoms may appear only hours later, giving the perpetrator time to act with impunity. You notice each server, each attendant, each whispered exchange, analyzing intentions with painstaking care. Every sip is a test of both judgment and endurance. Blinding and mutilation remain present threats. You learn that punishment is not arbitrary, but symbolic. Rivals for power are often blinded to prevent future claims to the throne, their eyes removed with heated rods or knives. Others may have tongues or noses cut as permanent markers of humiliation. Witnessing or even hearing of these acts reinforces the constant tension in the court. Fear becomes ambient, unspoken yet omnipresent, guiding every action and decision. You are aware that proximity to power comes with physical and psychological risk. Political and religious alignment is critical. The emperor represents divine authority, and disputes over theology are inseparable from governance. Support for or opposition to iconoclasm, adherence to orthodoxy, or subtle statements about the patriarch's authority can result in exile, punishment, or forced monastic life. Clerics, often present in court, monitor behavior closely. Their observations can be reported as evidence of heresy or disloyalty. You are constantly evaluating your words, aware that a casual remark could be construed as both theological and political dissent. By midday, the corridors are crowded with officials, courtiers, and visitors from distant provinces. Reports arrive from generals stationed along the Danube or in Anatolia, documents detailing troop movements, taxation, and diplomacy are delivered in sealed packets. Misreading or misplacing a single document could draw suspicion. You learn to anticipate questions before they are asked, to phrase responses with care, and to maintain composure under constant scrutiny. Even minor errors are noted and remembered, circulating through the palace like invisible tracers of fault. By the afternoon, your awareness extends to the palace environment itself. Marble floors are polished and slippery. Candles, drip wax, posing minor but constant hazards. Heavy doors swing with force. Servants carrying hot food or burning lamps navigate narrow corridors, requiring constant vigilance. Even these mundane details carry consequences. A stumble or injury could be interpreted as incompetence or disrespect. Every physical movement is, therefore, both practical and political. Fatigue begins to accumulate. Mental strain is compounded by the necessity of vigilance. You recognize patterns of alliances and enmities, but cannot always predict outcomes. Conversations are multi-layered. Gestures carry subtext, and silence is equally meaningful. The eunuch's subtle manipulations and the courtier's whispered schemes form an undercurrent that is both invisible and omnipresent. You must constantly evaluate not only what is said, but what is unsaid, reading intent behind expressions and positioning. As evening approaches, rituals wind down. Candles flicker in corridors, mosaics glint faintly in dim light, and incense fills the air with a lingering aroma. Yet the lessons of the day remain. The knowledge that a single misstep gesture, word, or glance could result in punishment, mutilation, or exile never fades. Your endurance is tested not only physically but mentally. As every interaction requires careful calculation, survival is dependent on constant attention, meticulous observation, and the capacity to act without hesitation or error. By the end of the day, as you rest lightly on a marble bench or a wooden platform, you understand that the palace is a living organism of observation and power. The emperor, the eunuchs, the courtiers, the ceremonial rituals, and the ever-present threat of blinding or poison create an environment where error is fatal and vigilance is endless. You realize that enduring even a single week in this setting demands mental resilience beyond what most can sustain, and you are beginning to understand that Byzantium's throne rooms are not merely halls of governance, but instruments of control, fear, and subtle, continuous threat. You step into the wooden and canvas-covered tents of a medieval battlefield hospital, and the first thing that strikes you is the smell. It is thick, almost suffocating. Sweat from men who have marched for days blends with the coppery stench of fresh blood and the putrid odor of infected wounds. The air is heavy, stagnant, and carries tiny particles of dust, straw, and linen fibers. The ground is uneven, trodden into mud and dried blood in patches, and every step makes a faint squelching sound under your boots. There are no floors, only earth, and the uneven surface catches your ankle with each cautious step. The hospital is filled with rows of patients lying on straw-stuffed mattresses or even directly on the dirt, their bodies bent into uncomfortable positions, moaning or remaining silent, the only movement, sometimes, their shallow breathing or occasional twitch of pain. Light filters through the open flaps of tents or through cracks in the wooden walls, casting pale, uneven shadows that fall across men who are swollen, bruised, and scarred. The first thing a new patient experiences is the overwhelming awareness of exposure. Clothing is tattered or stripped away for treatment. You notice immediately how little is done to preserve modesty, because survival and access to injuries take priority over comfort. Wounds are everywhere. Some are fresh from battle, gaping and raw, bleeding or already clotted in dark, sticky layers. Others are older, showing blackened edges and swelling where infection has begun. Gangrene sets in quietly but relentlessly, particularly in limbs crushed under the weight of fallen men, or in legs pierced by long arrows or halberds. Tissue dyes, turning black or dark green, emitting a faint but persistent odor that clings to anyone who moves too close. A simple cut that would heal in a week on a clean battlefield becomes a mortal threat here. Amputations are common. The barber surgeon, sometimes a man who doubles as a barber in town, approaches with saws and knives. He wears no gloves. He wipes his hands on scraps of cloth between patients. Instruments are reused. Alcohol for cleaning is rare, and sterilization is unknown. The patient is strapped to a wooden bench or held down by fellow soldiers. There is no anesthesia beyond alcohol, or perhaps a crushed herb applied to the wound. And even this offers only partial dulling of sensation. The saw bites through flesh and bone with repeated, measured force. Blood sprays, mixing with sweat and dirt. The sound is a dull, horrifying rasp of metal against marrow, punctuated by the screams or low groans of men around you. Flies swarm in the air. They are drawn to the smell of open wounds, decaying flesh, and spilled blood. They settle constantly on exposed tissue, depositing larvae without hindrance. Patients slap at them, some succeeding, some failing. Even a fresh dressing cannot keep them away. Any piece of cloth used to wrap a limb is often reused for multiple patients, thick with old blood and pus. In such conditions, bacterial infections spread rapidly. Sepsis is a silent killer. Fever develops quietly, sometimes accompanied by delirium. Men writhe and sweat as their bodies fight invisible enemies, while the surgeons move on to the next patient. Pain is constant, dull, and sharp. A man with a leg about to be amputated may be strapped and wait hours while others are treated. The smell of gangrene and blood-laced sweat fills his nostrils. Flies crawl over his hands. Every minute stretches unbearably. If a limb is not removed promptly, the infection spreads, making survival less likely. If it is removed, the shock of blood loss can overwhelm a weakened body. Even if you survive the procedure, the lack of sterile bandages and proper wound care ensures that the stump often becomes infected again. Medieval medicine relies heavily on balancing humors. Bloodletting is common, even on battlefield casualties. A barber may cut a vein in the forearm to drain perceived excess blood. The patient may be dizzy or faint. In some cases, leeches are applied, though the choice depends on what the surgeon believes will restore balance. The notion of miasma dominates understanding. The belief that foul air carries disease. Patients lie in crowded tents with barely enough space to breathe fresh air. Filth accumulates in corners. Urine soaks, straw bedding, and vomit pools in small hollows in the ground. The combination of gangrene, untreated wounds, and bloodletting makes survival precarious. Amputated limbs are disposed of haphazardly. Some are burned. Some are left nearby until they can be transported away. Flies hover over discarded flesh, and the smell intensifies the already oppressive atmosphere. Patients glimpse these remnants as a grim reminder of their own fragility. The psychological strain is profound. Some men weep quietly, others go silent, their faces drawn and pale. The cries of those who will not survive echo in the tents. You would not last long here, not because of a single moment, but because the environment relentlessly attacks every sense and every weak point of your body. Hunger and thirst accompany injury. Food is scarce and barely nourishing. Bread is hard and often moldy. Water is rationed and may carry parasites. Weakness amplifies infection. You lie on your back, watching men convulse as fever climbs. The stench of rotting flesh, urine, and unwashed bodies clings to your hair and clothes. The sound of saws, groans, and flies hums steadily. You realize that any minor scratch on your hand could develop into a fatal infection within days. The presence of disease is constant, invisible, and relentless. You notice the dirt on your own skin, crusted from sweat and the grime of the floor. Lice jump along your clothing. Fleas bite. You scratch instinctively. Every small wound is a potential entry point for bacteria. Patients are stacked closely together to maximize space. Those who survive one day may die the next from infections they cannot see. There is no routine hygiene. Linen is changed only if it is entirely soiled or torn. Soap is rare. Water is precious. Hands that touch wounds also touch food and utensils, spreading disease further. By the end of the first day in this environment, even a man who has never been injured feels the creeping weight of fatigue and nausea. Your stomach churns from the smells and sights. Your head aches from heat and stress. Your body is on alert constantly. The environment is designed only for the immediate treatment of battle wounds, and even that is rudimentary. Long-term recovery is almost impossible. In this setting, you would rot quietly, slowly, under the weight of infection, flies, blood, And the harsh practice is meant to save lives, but often hasten death. Every breath brings another assault. Scent of decay, sting of flies, sound of groaning patients, sight of bloodied limbs, touch of filth. Every hour stretches, dragging your body and mind toward exhaustion, and as night falls over the tents, lanterns casting flickering light, you lie among the wounded and dying, understanding in a calm, measured way that the medieval battlefield hospital is not a place of comfort. It is a crucible, and survival is a matter of more than chance. By the second day, your body begins to feel the cumulative effects of constant exposure to filth, disease, and injury. The straw beneath you is damp and soiled, pressing unevenly against your back, and every movement sends small splinters into skin already tender from previous scrapes and cuts. The smell is relentless. Sour sweat, old blood, pus from infected wounds, and the faint but unmistakable odor of gangrenous flesh. The patients around you moan softly or twitch involuntarily, their limbs rigid with fever or tremulous from pain. You notice how even small tasks, raising your head, shifting a hand, adjusting a blanket, require effort because your muscles are fatigued, dehydrated, and lightly bruised from sleeping on the uneven ground. Flies continue to swarm. They settle on exposed wounds and on the faces of the patients, crawling over eyes and lips. Some patients slap at them constantly, while others seem too weak to notice. The larvae laid by the flies quickly begin to burrow into tissue. Open wounds fester, dead tissue becomes a feast. Gangrene spreads steadily, especially in fingers, toes, and legs crushed or wounded by battle. Even small cuts on uninjured patients can fester when left untreated. Infection moves silently, invisibly, but you can sense it in the subtle swelling of skin, the dull throbbing in muscles, and the pungent, sweetish smell that rises whenever a patient shifts. Amputations continue. The barber surgeon moves efficiently from one patient to the next, saw and knife in hand. The air is filled with a dull, repetitive rasp of metal against bone. Blood flows freely, pooling on the ground, soaking straw and cloth. Alcohol or herbs may be applied to dull pain, but their effect is minimal. Patients scream, groan, or become silent as shock overtakes them. You are strapped down, and even if you try to look away, the sounds, smells, and proximity of other men undergoing the same procedure make it unavoidable. The amputation itself is only the first step. Without clean bandages or antiseptic care, infection will inevitably follow, sometimes more dangerous than the initial injury. Bloodletting is ongoing for patients who are not actively being amputated. The barber makes small incisions to remove perceived excess blood, believing that balancing humors will aid recovery. Veins in the forearm are punctured. Blood flows steadily into shallow balls or cloths. You notice dizziness as you watch, or perhaps feel it yourself if you are next. The act is almost ritualistic in its repetition, but it weakens the patient further. Any fever, dehydration, or minor wound becomes exacerbated by the loss of blood. The humoral theory, central to medieval medicine, leaves the patient vulnerable to its own dangerous logic. More blood may be removed than is safe, worsening weakness and increasing mortality. You may hear distant commands from the tent entrances, orders shouted to carriers bringing fresh wounded from the battlefield. Stretchers are carried carefully, but sometimes roughly, the patients moaning under the weight. Each new arrival adds to the congestion, forcing patients to lie closer together. The smell intensifies. The noise grows. There is no space to move comfortably. Every inch of the tent is claimed by suffering. Small pools of blood, vomit, or urine mingle with mud and straw. The floors are slippery, uneven, and infectious. Lice and fleas infest every garment. The constant itching, the gnawing of parasites, and the small cuts from frantic movement become further entry points for infection. Food is sparse and barely nourishing. Thin gruel, hard bread, or small scraps of meat are passed around. You eat mechanically, chewing slowly because your jaw is sore from stress, your stomach unsettled from the smells, and your body already weakened by dehydration. Water is rash. Sometimes it carries parasites or is clouded with sediment from poorly cleaned barrels. You drink cautiously, knowing the need for hydration but fearing illness from the water itself. Hunger and thirst sap strength, making every movement more arduous and increasing vulnerability to disease. The psychological impact is as profound as the physical. Men lie on straw, screaming or silent, watching each other suffer. You notice vacant stares, quiet tears, muttered prayers, or whispered curses. Some men rock slowly, humming or chanting to themselves. Others groan quietly, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The proximity of death is immediate. The smell, sight, and sound of decay pressed upon you relentlessly. Even if you are uninjured, the environment erodes your resilience, sharpening stress and anxiety into a constant, low-level ache. By midday, gangrene and infections are claiming more patients. Limbs that are blackened, swollen, and falsemelin are dragged toward the saw or left to decay until the surgeon has time. Flies continue their constant assault, laying eggs in open wounds, spreading bacteria. The pus that seeps from infected tissue is thick and yellow-green, sticky on the skin and never fully removed. Patients cannot clean themselves properly. They cannot move easily. Their bodies weaken further by the hour. Any attempt at hygiene is minimal. Water, if available, is used primarily to moisten bandages or wash hands of the surgeon. Patients rarely bathe. Clothes are unchanged unless utterly filthy. Sweat and blood crust together. Parasites move freely. The environment ensures that infection spreads faster than recovery. Fever develops quietly. Weakness sets in. You may notice shivering even when the tent is warm. Delirium is not uncommon. A man may begin to mutter, to talk to invisible figures, or to attempt to rise despite weakness. Attempting to move can worsen injury. Even routine care is perilous. Bandages soaked with blood or pus are replaced slowly, often by untrained assistants. Instruments are shared. Dressings are minimal. Any slip introduces new bacteria into already compromised wounds. Every patient is in constant danger, not only from pre-existing injuries, but from the environment itself. By the second day, you are acutely aware that survival is a fragile balance of chance, resilience, and the timing of care. As evening approaches, the tents darken. Light from lanterns flickers unevenly across sweat-slicked skin, exposed wounds, and pale faces. The smell remains unchanged. Flies settle in the dim glow. Patients cry softly, cough, or remain silent, staring at the ceiling or at the ground. The barber-surgeon moves steadily from one patient to the next, metal rasping through bone or flesh, leaving behind only pain, shock, and the faint hope of survival. You lie among them, understanding that in this environment, your body is under constant siege. Infection, fatigue, hunger, and parasites work together to erode strength, slowly but steadily. And as night falls fully, with only the flickering light to cast shadows across bloodied straw and swollen limbs, you realize with quiet certainty that surviving another day in a medieval battlefield, hospital is as much a matter of luck as skill. And every moment that passes brings the relentless threat of disease and death closer to your own body. On the third day, the environment inside the battlefield hospital begins to feel almost oppressive in a way that goes beyond physical discomfort. The air is hotter now, stagnant from the bodies of dozens of men pressed close together under canvas or wooden beams. Every breath carries the mingled scent of sweat, blood, pus, and the faint but persistent odor of decomposing tissue from gangrenous limbs that have not yet been treated. The ground beneath you is uneven and damp. Straw is soaked from blood, sweat, and rain tracked in from the muddy paths outside. Every movement sends a soft crunch or squelch beneath your boots or against your hands as you attempt to adjust your position. Even lying still is impossible without constant awareness of the rough, abrasive surface. You notice the relentless presence of flies. They cover wounds and move quickly between patients, depositing eggs and bacteria wherever they land. Their tiny bodies crawl along, exposed flesh and damp clothing, landing on faces, hands, and open sores. Men slap at them or shoo them away, But the insects are persistent. Larvae begin burrowing into compromised tissue within hours. Gangrene, already insidious, accelerates quietly as infection spreads. Blackened, full-smelling limbs lie side by side with red, swollen, pus-filled injuries. The sight alone is enough to cause nausea. The smell is constant. You feel it clinging to your hair, clothing, and skin. And there is no escape. Amputations continue throughout the day. The barber-surgeon moves methodically, saw in hand, moving from patient to patient. Skillet, but the technique is brutal and indiscriminate. Limbs are strapped, sawed through bone and muscle, and treated only superficially afterward. Blood flows freely, mixing with sweat and the damp straw beneath. Alcohol or herbs may be applied to dull pain, but they do little against the shock and agony of the procedure. Patients scream, moan, or remain silent as adrenaline fades and pain overwhelms them. Recovery is uncertain. Infection is more dangerous than the procedure itself. Many men die from sepsis days later. In between amputations, the barber continues. Veins are open to release blood, supposedly balancing humors and aiding recovery. In practice, the procedure weakens patients already exhausted by wounds and fever. Bowls fill with dark, viscous blood. Patients faint or sway on the ground, and assistants must hold them down to prevent further injury. The lack of sterilization ensures that each incision introduces a new threat. Small cuts from clothing, straw, or even fingernails become potential points of bacterial invasion. Every second spent in the hospital increases exposure to disease. New arrivals from the battlefield strain the limited space even further. Stretches and cots bring men groaning, bleeding, and broken. They are stacked in every corner, lying on top of straw or the floor, with barely a foot between one patient and the next. The noise, rises, groans, screams, muttered prayers, the scraping of wood from stretchers, and the constant buzzing of flies. There is no privacy. There is no comfort. The environment itself is designed solely to provide rudimentary emergency care, not to protect dignity, not to ensure survival beyond the immediate crisis. Hunger and thirst continue to weaken everyone. Food consists of thin gruel, scraps of bread, or small pieces of salted meat. Water is rationed and often unclean, carrying parasites or sediment from poorly washed containers. Weakness spreads through the patients. Men who could stand yesterday now lie too exhausted to even lift their heads. The combination of infection, blood loss, and malnutrition steadily erodes resistance to disease. Fever rises, shivering sets in, and delirium is common. Some mutter incomprehensibly. Others weep quietly. The psychological toll mirrors the physical devastation. Even small injuries become deadly. A nick from a knife, a scratch from straw, or a blister from walking in wet boots can become infected within hours. The absence of antibiotics and the prevalence of bacteria and flies make minor wounds mortal threats. Swelling develops, pus collects, and gangrene spreads if circulation is compromised. Pain pulses relentlessly. You are constantly aware of it, even if it is not your own body that is afflicted. The afternoon, the hospital is almost unbearable. Limbs blackened with gangrene lie next to freshly amputated stumps, the air thick with iron and decay. Flies crawl freely. The barber moves mechanically, focused only on procedure. Feverish men lie sweating, eyes glassy, groaning softly. Blood-soaked bandages are replaced as best as possible with minimal material, sometimes reused cloths. Infection spreads unchecked. Each breath, each movement, each touch exposes you to new bacteria. Even leaning against the wall can result in contact with contaminated surfaces. The combination of exhaustion, hunger, dehydration, pain, and disease ensures that the weakest cannot last long. The psychological strain intensifies. Men lose the ability to concentrate. Some convulse or mutter to themselves. Others lie quietly, staring at nothing. As delirium creeps in, the body's defenses weaken in the heat and filth. Any remaining strength dissipates slowly until it is nearly impossible to rise or resist. By evening, lanterns flicker unevenly across the cramped space. Shadows fall over, faces twisted with pain. The ground is sticky. slick with blood, urine, and mud. Flies settle on exposed flesh, crawling into wounds and hair. The barber continues, methodical and unhurried, moving from patient to patient, indifferent to screams or whimpers. Outside, the wind blows through the tents, bringing no relief. Inside, the heat, the stench, the moisture, and the unending labor ensure that your body and mind remain on constant alert. As night deepens, you lie among the sick and dying, understanding that the environment is as lethal as any weapon. The combination of open wounds, flies, bloodletting, gangrene, poor hygiene, and inadequate food creates a slow, inevitable decay. Survival is uncertain, and even a strong, healthy man would struggle to endure more than a few days without succumbing to infection, exhaustion, or despair. The hospital itself is a crucible of rot and suffering, unrelenting, unfeeling, and indiscriminate in its toll. By the fourth day, the battlefield hospital has become almost unbearable in every sense. The smell is more oppressive, heavier with the addition of sweat, blood, and pus that has begun to collect on unwashed bedding and clothing. Flies continue their relentless assault, moving freely from patient to patient, laying eggs in open wounds and spreading bacteria with each movement. Patients lie shoulder to shoulder, some moaning softly, others remaining silent but twitching with fever or delirium. The ground is saturated with mud, blood, and urine, making every step or shift in position treacherous. Even leaning against a wall or a post risks contact with infectious material. Amputations continue without pause. The barber surgeon moves mechanically, saw and knife in hand, cutting through limbs with little concern beyond speed and efficiency. Blood flows freely, soaking straw and cloth beneath the patient. Pain is constant and unrelenting. Alcohol or crushed herbs may be applied to dull sensations slightly, but shock and agony overwhelm any relief. Patients scream or go silent, faces contorted, bodies trembling. Infection is almost guaranteed afterward because bandages are minimal and rarely clean. Gangrene spreads quietly in untreated tissue. Limbs that might have survived on a clean battlefield rot quickly in this environment. Bloodletting continues alongside surgery. Veins are opened to restore supposed humoral balance, but each incision weakens the patient further. Fainting is common, requiring assistance to hold the weakened body. Patients already exhausted from wounds and fever become more vulnerable. Any small cut, scrape, or insect bite becomes an entry point for deadly infection. Parasites thrive on clothing and bedding, adding to the constant assault on the body. Lice, fleas, and maggots infiltrate every crevice, compounding disease and discomfort. New casualties arrive constantly from the battlefield, carried on stretchers or by hand. Each arrival adds to the congestion, forcing patients closer together. The noise rises, groans, screams, scraping wood, the rasp of saws, and the buzzing of flies. There is no privacy, no comfort. Survival depends on resilience, luck, and timing of care. Hunger and thirst remain constant. Food is thin gruel or scraps of bread, often moldy. Water is rationed, sometimes unclean, carrying parasites or weakness spreads. Men too exhausted to stand may lie where they fell, shivering from fever or delirium. Small injuries become lethal. Even minor scratches or blisters quickly become infected. Pus collects in swollen tissue, gangrene spreads, and the body deteriorates steadily. The weakest succumb first. The psychological strain is as severe as the physical. Patients convulse, mutter incoherently, or fall silent, staring at nothing. Delirium and exhaustion erode willpower. Every breath carries filth and disease. Every touch risks contamination. Afternoon. The hospital is a scene of relentless decay. Limbs blackened with gangrene lie next to freshly amputated stumps. Flies crawl freely over patients and corpses alike. Bandages are minimal and often reused, ensuring infection spreads rapidly. Fever rises in men who seem stable in the morning. Pain pulses in every muscle, every nerve. The environment is a constant, unrelenting assault. Even a strong man would be worn down by this fourth day, his body failing under the combined weight of infection, exhaustion, hunger, and exposure. As evening falls, lanterns cast flickering shadows over the cramped, bloodied space. The heat of the day persists, clinging to damp walls and straw bedding. Flies settle on wounds and hair. The barber-surgeon moves among the dying, indifferent to screams or moans. Patients shiver, sweat, or twitch uncontrollably. Sleep is shallow, broken, and rare. The smell, the noise, the constant presence of death ensure that even rest is incomplete. By nightfall, you understand fully that survival is a fragile matter. Infection, gangrene, blood loss, and exhaustion strike indiscriminately. The hospital, intended as a place of care, is as lethal as the battlefield itself. Each passing hour brings new threats, and even a man with no visible injuries suffers from the environment. The fourth day concludes with quiet despair. A patient lying among the sick and dying, knowing that the medieval battlefield hospital is a place where bodies decay and rot with patient inevitability. And wait, tat, the hospital hums, softly with fevered breathing, groans, and the faint buzz of flies, the lantern swaying gently as if marking time over a space that neither heals nor forgets, leaving you acutely aware that survival here is improbable, and that each day only increases the slow, inescapable toll of disease, rot, and relentless suffering. Good night.